Excellent. Let's call the meeting to order. Planning Commission on the 17th of April. Who can do a roll call?
Vice Chair Targ. Commissioner Krasinski.
Here.
Commissioner Brothers.
Here.
Commissioner Copsil.
Here.
Chair Golden.
Here.
Thank you.
Excellent. We need to do oral communications first. We've got feedback.
You have feedback.
It's me, after I told you not to,
Yeah.
not to be on audio. Yeah, it is. Mike, better? Better? Okay, all right. Oral communications. So this would be on something that is not as part of the agenda. Do we have anybody who wants to comment on anything other than the housing element and our zoning for it? I'm looking around the schoolhouse. I don't see any hands raised. Let's see on the attendees. I'm not getting attendees now.
I have two hands.
Adrian, can you call them for me?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I have one hand. So first it's Caroline.
Good evening. I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the commission that people cannot call in by phone. It says that the meeting number is not correct. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, Caroline. I did notice that actually, so apologies to anybody who's having trouble. If somebody can only join via phone, I can email the correct meeting information and password if that's helpful. My address is asmith@portolavalley.net. So feel free to just send me a note and I'll get that off to you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I do not see any others, open communication. So I'd like to go right to Mr. Teasing, who has one of the properties associated with this, and he has some public input that he provided with us just as we came up to the podium. So if you could give us a little short comment on that, that would be great.
Thank you. Richard Teasing. And I wish to associate myself with the comments of Jim White. I think there could be more collaboration and back and forth with the town than there is now. And I think that the best example would be that I found out about this by reading the Pinecone and found out that I had 9 units in my property that were being targeted for above market use. And that's how I found out. And I think it had been going on for quite a while by then. So that's just one example. And I think there ought to be some reach out. I mean, that's really surprising, I think, that it's gone for so long. And in the housing element, it states that I've had a lot of vacancies in my office building, which isn't correct. I've been a couple of years, it's been fully leased at the time that was published. So it's not very good for my reputation. I don't know where anybody got that information, but it wasn't for me. So I wanted to talk mainly about mixed use, and I'm going to be making the same point I made it the first time I talked to you, but I guess I wasn't very articulate then, and I'm going to try better this time. But a lot's happened since then. So multi-use means many uses, right? And there are all the uses that were listed in the AFCC document are all uses under the AP zone. And I showed you, there's a list of 24 that is an attachment here of uses under the AP zone, which would be part of the multi-use zone. All of those would require planning commission approval. There is one AP use that does not require planning commission approval, and that's the R1 use. And that's the option that the property owner of my property should have. They should have the option of the R1 under the code or the duplex triplex under the new multi-use. And it's so and it has, it's a principal permitted use, so it's a use by right. So what I'm suggesting is that my property would have the option of being R1 or duplex and triplex. And if it's R1, I would suggest that there be a 1/4 acre minimum and that there, make sure there's 3 dwelling units. That could be 2 lots that have a house and an ADU. And I think that would make a nice project. If the owner, oh, let me back up. I'm not gonna build this. I'm 84 years old. I don't have the time to do that. I will sell the property. And I want the buyer to have the maximum amount of opportunities. And that's a lot of the reason that I've been exploring this, is so that I can tell a buyer what might be likely or acceptable to the town. So the draft of the committee, they use the principal use. They acknowledge that single-family dwellings are one of the principal uses, as well as multifamily. So seems pretty clear to me, a lot clearer than it did when I presented it to you before, that the owner has the option. Either one is part of the multi-use project. Last page, I don't want to talk about it particularly unless you want. There's been some talk about whether there was an agreement on the usage of the property, and there was no agreement as far as I know. And there was a discussion, but the way it was left was that the neighbor was going to get back to me and never did. So there's no agreement as far as I know. And I think that what's in the housing element and what's in this committee's in their report, to the extent it assumes that there was an agreement, it shouldn't. I think it should be stripped of that. And I think that they should start from scratch with the kind of regulations they think the property should have, rather than based on what they thought was an agreement. So I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I thank you for the accommodation.
No problem. Thank you. So the other thing, of course, we've asked our ASCC to work very hard and have multiple meetings. And I know we got a update on their thoughts just before. So there's one in the package and then there's one that came out this afternoon. I was hoping to get an update from the ASCC as to where they were and what they thought at this point. I don't know, is that Rebecca or Carter? And one of you want to, able to do that for me? There isn't a staff report. Is there a staff report? No. Yes. Just checking up on.
Well, I included a staff report, but because ASCC provided an update to their mixed use recommendations, that came out after the staff report was, after the packet was released. Chair Golden suggesting that ASCC can frame the nature of that updated document.
The point of order, I'm unclear on the agenda for today's meeting, given the update that we received from the ASCC. We have a reso or two in our packet. And I guess I'm looking to the chair or staff to provide direction as to whether or not the resolutions that we have are pertinent to today's meeting, or it may be that we will have an understanding of that more fully after the ASCC presents. But right now, the agenda, let me actually put it differently. I feel confused with respect to the agenda. The agenda is not confused.
Okay. Adrian, would you like to frame things up for us?
Yeah, in my staff presentation, I was gonna go over this and kind of help frame the discussion for Planning Commission tonight. Indeed, the package includes a resolution, but my understanding from preliminary discussions, just among staff consultants, and I spoke with Chair Golden, it's unlikely that PC will be prepared to make a recommendation this evening. And so we can talk about how tonight's meeting can go in terms of discussion, if that makes sense.
That's helpful.
So maybe if it would also help, I was gonna do this later, but we can switch the order around. It's off. Oh, look. Well, it says it's offering to turn audio. It's offering to turn audio on for me, which would imply that it's off. Yes. It was the cord? No,
It's still there.
it's still there. I don't think so.
Try to turn the room volume down a little bit.
Okay. Is that a little bit better?
Yes, I
Okay.
think it is. Oh,
No, I get too close. I'm sorry about that. Got it. I just turned audio off and on again, so. Okay. Let me sit then back. So in terms of, where I would like to see us go tonight, I have three things that I'd like to make sure we discuss, both from questions, and from our discussion. Of course, you're all welcome to add additional things to that. But kind of the three are, where do you think we are in terms of readiness to hand off to the council and HCD? What are your current concerns and your current priorities that you think we should be addressing? And do you have suggestions as a third item on how we should move forward? So that's kind of what I'm framing the discussion up for this evening. And I did want to get the update from the ASCC. Does that help?
So could you also say what the agenda will be? So it sounds like there's a staff presentation.
Yeah, I didn't see that actually on the agenda, but you have a presentation you want to do? Or no?
Yes.
Yeah, oh,
I'll
you
give
do?
one.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that then. But anyway, I would like to go to the ASCC to have you give their update, and then if we get to Adrian, I think that would be good.
that's good.
From this lowly ASCC, member standpoint, I think that, if Adrian does her presentation, kind of outlines what we've done. The reason that the three of us are here, are to amplify or answer any questions that you have, regarding our recommendation.
So you're saying you prefer to hear from Adrian first?
I do think that.
Okay.
That makes the most sense because I think it'll flow downhill better. And then we'll have.
I'm okay with that. Let's go do it.
We'll have our recommendations,
Okay.
up on the screen. We have spent some time on it. Clearly, it's not enough time, but,
Well, let's,
based
Ricardo,
on
let's go with Adrian.
just, I'm trying to frame this.
Okay,
Okay, and that, based on, the feedback from the planning commission and from the town council, we're making recommendations that we feel pretty good about what they will do for the properties that are being rezoned. And the ASCC is establishing a future, set of future agendas, for some of the other things that we know need to happen, including, refined design guidelines.
Okay. It's the two of us.
I just want to say I don't actually go into detail about ASCC's recommendations. I don't dive into analysis because I wanted that conversation to come out in discussion. Okay. All right, give me one moment. Let me pull it up.
That get better when you turned off the mic? Is it our two mics that are interfering? No, it's still there, right?
You're just electric and you're causing static wherever you're at.
I have a field around.
All right. So first, actually, I'll invite Catherine just to jump in. She just wanted to make a statement about potential conflicts.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Catherine here, town attorney. Nice to be with you. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person this evening. This is just a reminder for the commission and the community that's tuning in. So under state conflicts of interest law, we have to be mindful of having commissioners participate on matters where they have financial interest. And for the purposes of this this meeting, I just wanted to provide a reminder that we have Vice Chair Targ, who has been recusing on discussions of mixed use due to work that his law partner does with respect to Willow Commons, and also a reminder that ASCC Chair Carter War also recuses on discussions of the mixed use zoning classification. So what has worked in prior meetings is that the commissions have been able to sort of structure the discussions so that they can discuss mixed use at one time, and the conflicted commissioners can leave the room. Then those commissioners could come back and discuss the multifamily. So that's just the reminder. I understand that the ASCC actually, there are three members there probably because they had to appoint two different subcommittees to navigate this conflicts issue. So I trust that the folks there can structure things accordingly. Thanks, Adrian. If those are any questions, I'll turn this back to Adrian.
Just as a point of clarification, and counsel, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. This is Nicholas Targ. One of my partners does represent Mr. White on the Willows project. That creates an appearance of a conflict of interest. The amount of monetary impact is de minimis under the state regulations. Therefore, I'm recusing myself, not because of a conflict, but because of an appearance. And if I misstated that, I'd ask that you correct. And
You did not, and thank you, Vice Chair, for that clarification.
Thank you.
Okay, so as is typical, our meeting format tonight, we'll get through my presentation. We will ask ASCC to give a little intro to their recommendations that they've passed on to Planning Commission. Next, we'll get to Planning Commission clarifying questions. We'll do public comments, and then we'll get to discussion. So really quickly, staff and consultants who've worked on this. I'm in the schoolhouse this evening, and then joining us remotely, Town Attorney Engberg, and then we have our Lisa Wise consulting team, Monica, Roger, and David are joining us remotely this evening to answer questions. So bear with me. This is a series of slides that many of you have seen, probably a lot in the schoolhouse as well. A lot of people have been following along, but just in case anybody's new to the process, I do want to take a little moment to remind everybody of what's gone on so far. So back in January, council adopted our housing element we submitted in short order to HCD. We did get a letter of substantial compliance on January 30th. We were told at that time to continue timely and effective implementation of all of our programs. Foremost there is our rezonings to allow our housing sites to be freed up for development. On February 5th, we got a letter from HCD's Proactive Housing Accountability Chief pointing out that our rezonings were in fact due by January 31st. Responded, said, yeah, we're on it. We're on it. We have a plan. Beginning with our first planning commission meeting on March 20th, we didn't get an immediate response back. Then on the 26th, we received a letter from HCD saying it decertified our housing element. And once we've adopted our required rezones, HCD will consider recertifying. We expect that that won't be an overly complex process because we don't intend to alter our housing element. We're just submitting our rezones. So hopefully that will be a simple matter. Of course, now we're out of compliance, so builder's remedy is we're once again vulnerable to builder's remedy rather. Where we're at in this process, we started on March 20th. Planning Commission held a discussion and suggested at that time that it wanted a more involved town input process, and they wanted to begin with the ASCC. So the ASCC held its first workshop on March 25th. They undertook a comprehensive review of the draft amendments. They discussed a lot of technical development and design standards. And at that time, the commission appointed a subcommittee consisting of Chair Warren and Vice Chair Flynn to compile all that feedback to be forwarded on to Planning Commission. Then Planning Commission and ASCC met jointly on April 3rd to discuss ASCC's feedback. ASCC gave a presentation to go over all that feedback. The commissioners jointly collaborated, talked through everything. They determined that the ASCC should meet another time in another workshop session to further crystallize their recommendations. So the ASCC met on April 8th and held that second workshop. At that time, the ASCC struck a second subcommittee, and that was consisting of Vice Chair Flynn and Commissioner Dixon to address all mixed use zone feedback. And then the original committee of Chair War and Vice Chair Flynn held for the multifamily zone and other areas of the draft code. So ASCC's recommended changes to the draft code. They've done a lot of work. It's been very productive, very thoughtful. A lot of the ASCC's recommendations are highly technical. And we talked a bit about this at the joint meeting on April 3rd, that more than likely staff would need some time to work with consultants and test out a lot of these highly technical standards, because we just want to make sure that we're putting into effect workable code, essentially. So we need to make sure that all of these objective and development design standards allow for a non-discretionary review process that does not add constraints to the developmental potential of our housing sites. We also need to make sure that all recommended amendments do not contradict standards and land use standards set forth in the housing element and in our general plan comprehensive map. So tonight's meeting, Planning Commission is charged with deciding which of ASCC's recommendations to incorporate into the draft. There is a lot to consider. And just a reminder that our zoning code amendments are limited to implementing the housing element. So we should really try to stick to that scope and determine what is pressing right now and what could be addressed at a later date. So staff are definitely looking for direction on which technical design standards and development standards the commission wants to pursue. And then we can go away and work on site testing. So I think I'm glad that we have 3 members of ASCC here tonight to ensure that their intent and goals behind their recommendations are really clear to commissioners and to staff so that we can translate all of this into non-discretionary workable code. So we're recommending a revised schedule, and that would be Planning Commission meets again on May 1st. So in the interim, that's going to give staff and consultants 2 weeks. It's tight, but we should be able to have the time we need to do any technical site testing as is directed by the commission. So hopefully when we come back on May 1st, the benefit is we can provide a revised draft code with all the recommendations incorporated. So that will be a smoother process for review for the commissioners to see everything in one place in one single document. So hopefully, again, on May 1st, the commission will be in a position where they're ready to make a recommendation to council. So revised next steps, we'll meet on May 1st, and then hopefully by May 22nd, town council will be ready to go to act on a recommendation by planning commission. And because there's a requirement to adopt an ordinance, council needs to meet twice, so there'll be a first reading and a second reading. So May 22nd and June 12th is the current schedule we're looking at right now. Okay, so that's it for staff presentation.
Thank you. Are we all good on what we're trying to accomplish tonight? Excellent. Excellent. So, back to where I wanted to jump right to. I wanted to give the ASCC a chance to, is there anything you want to add to that, or, what your thought process are, that type of thing? Mike.
The general thought, the Carter War, ASCC. I'm here with, colleagues, Rebecca Flynn, and Gina Dixon. And we're proud to have had the opportunity, to, take a look at these rules. And in general, what the rules were, what our adjustments were intended to do was to make the rules more compatible with our rural environment, and to look forward to how these rules would be implemented, on additional properties that are not yet, the subject of, the rezoning. In general, the changes are, to add a floor area ratio, limit, to the zoning districts, to add a landscape preserve, area ratio, and to adjust, the coverage area ratios so that we end up with an ability and a clear way to see that, we're not overdeveloping a property or putting, the developer in a bind where those ratios add up to more than 100%. In addition, we're, suggesting maximum building areas, not just the maximum coverage area, the maximum first floor, so that we can end up with buildings, more buildings, but more space between the buildings. As we as a commission felt like the space between the buildings and the open space, was important, to creating a more rural environment. And then from an affordability and kind of fair housing standpoint, in combination with the floor area ratio and the building size limits, we're suggesting a minimum and maximum, of unit sizes, so that, the mix of units, would be bracketed, rather than having very, very large units and very, very small units. I didn't know, Adrian, if you wanted to put up our summaries, so that we could, kind of go through them.
Actually, unless the rest of the PC would like to go through that, I'm not sure that's actually necessary. I assume everybody read it, or would you like to go through it?
Not necessary for me. I'm fine.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Carter, but I think we're good. We went through it, so.
As Catherine mentioned, I am conflicted on the mixed use, zoning district. So if you wanted to, talk about things with the multifamily districts and any of the other changes, I can participate in that, but I would need to recuse myself, because of, conflicts with, representing owners, of properties that are currently, being considered for rezoning in the mixed use zoning district.
Great, thank you. Catherine, just a quick question there. So I assume they can listen to the questions, right? It's the major discussion where we have to worry about recusing themselves, right?
Yeah, they can stay and listen to public comment. Technically, they can listen to clarifying questions from from the commission, though, if those are bleeding over into discussion, then we don't want to do that. So I would suggest probably if it's not inconvenient to just, limit clarifying questions to what's, really absolutely necessary to clarify things. And then, structure the discussion, when they're out of the room.
Okay, okay. And you'll let us know. You'll interrupt us if we start.
If you stray too far into discussion, yes, I will.
Okay, that's perfectly okay.
Okay.
All right, let's go to questions from the commission to either Adrian or the ASCC or whoever you like. Should we start? Who wants to start? Do we have to start? Do I need to pick somebody?
You're looking at me.
Linda, yeah, Linda. How about you, Linda?
Yeah, great idea. Go alphabetically. Let's see, Adrian, I like the revised schedule. The personal point here is I'm never going to approve zoning changes unless I could read a line by line red line. Question for you there is, can you take your current red line version and then use a different color print for the changes that we're going to make now so we can distinguish those?
I think that's a good format because I think we want to see where we started.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, okay, so we'll have our red line as presented and then we'll do a different color to show ASCC PC's
Yeah,
recommendations.
that should be doable technologically.
Mhm.
The other thing you might consider, I wouldn't make this a requirement, but I'll be going through it line by line at that point, and all of this other stuff I will then be looking at in the context of that document for consistency and making sure that the actual context is picked up in the rule. Sometimes it's useful to print things on lawyer's paper, which actually has pre-printed numbers on the lines. That might be more than you're available, but maybe Catherine has some lying around. It makes it very much easier to go through documents. People are looking for section 4B, little I6, middle of page. Just throw that out. When do you, your first meeting, when do you think you might have that?
A good question. I don't want to overcommit our consultants. Well, maybe if Monica, you wanted to jump in, just to speak to timing on that.
My suggestion would be that we try to deal with that as part of discussion in terms
Okay.
of what we want to do. And then maybe would say, can you do it? As opposed to asking you to sort of make it up on the fly.
Right,
Fair enough.
because it's unlikely I'd have the packet done ahead, but what I could do is just post the draft to the website. Because we have a drop down on zoning code amendments on the housing site, so I can just put that latest draft there. So, yeah.
I
we
was
can-
just thinking it would be useful if we got it, if everybody got it and sometime before our Friday, but.
Agreed.
but-
Okay, we'll do our utmost to get it out earlier.
Okay, my second question, I think is still for you, is I understand we want to keep this revision to the code very limited to what's necessary for the housing element, which I would say is probably to some extent almost an arbitrary distinction given the way HCD operates. But having said that, I would like to see if we could, in this process, also commit to when we're going to make the other changes. I don't want to vote on changes now, knowing additional changes are necessary, and then my term passes and the additional changes don't get made. I realize, I've heard a rumor that there is a new planning director. I realize that's a lot to ask, but I would like to see us try to put that in the document we send forward. So we have a commitment to the town. The council has a commitment to the town to do that. Those are kind of my main comments. Carter, I do have a question for you guys, and it may be that I haven't read all these details carefully enough, but I think I still saw the 38-foot building in here, and I'm concerned about the issue with the fire ladder issue. And I'm not as clever as Ronnie, so I didn't mark it, and the marked up copy I left at home. So maybe you could summarize for me where you got to on that issue of building heights, in particular with regard to the fire.
Um, we got, Rebecca, chime in too. We got to the 38 feet, height limit, to provide an opportunity for buildings, buildings to be 3 stories, in the, MF 23, zoning district. In the MF 4 zoning district, we stuck with the existing height limits, which are 28 to 34, 34 being the increase. We saw the 4-foot difference between the 34-foot lowest to highest in the current zoning ordinance, to 38 feet lowest to highest, as being a marginal difference. And based on the discussions that we've heard, and some of us have had, direct discussions with the fire marshal, explaining the way that fire service works. What they was explained to us was that when a structure fire, is reported, on 911, multiple apparatus from multiple mutual aid agencies, are dispatched, to the structure fire. While Woodside Fire Protection District doesn't have ladder trucks, in their arsenal, of apparatus, both Redwood City, and Menlo Park, have multiple, fire trucks, with ladder equipment, that would be dispatched. So we didn't deal with it directly. And I think the fire marshal, would be, a better place to go, with that. But the 4-foot increase, we didn't see as significant, and felt a lot better about the height limit, coming down from 42, to 38.
And I wanted to add that I had several discussions with Fire Marshal Giuliacci, and she confirmed that the 42-foot, they were perfectly capable of handling 42-foot buildings if they were located on a main artery. So Alpine Road, Portola Road, and possibly some of the other streets in town. But for sure, Alpine and Portola Road were, the fire department was perfectly capable of handling them with their standard operating procedure.
But with mutual aid. I've done mutual aid projects. I really would like to get some data from her on how it works here, because I've seen projects burned to the ground because mutual aid didn't work. I guess, but your code doesn't specifically address the location in your heights. So how are we going to incorporate that into, I mean, you can write anything into a code. You can say your building could be this high if it's along a main arterial. It can only be this high elsewhere. Am I missing something here? I mean, there's a lot of details here. I'm happy to have you tell me I missed it.
It was at some point, it was in our original suggestions, but I guess in the latest version, it may have not gotten included, but that is definitely a thing that should be included.
And at this point, there's only one property being even considered, and it is on Alpine.
Through the chair.
And that property is not considering doing 3 stories.
And if I may, I was just going to echo what Commissioner Flynn said, that indeed, there's only one property where this standard could apply, and they are on Alpine Road. Down the line, we have to think about if we're going to be using this zoning designation for other sites throughout town, we're going to have to revisit, I think. But for now, I think we're confident the site is on Alpine Road, so it will work.
This isn't the question, so it's probably out of order, but the way I like to draft things is just put that in the code. Just put it in there. You can always deal with it later. Just say, if it's on this road, it's okay. But anyway,
That is discussed.
yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm out of order. You called on me. Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm not going to get into the details. I really, really appreciate your expertise that your committee brought on the land area and the building size and so on and so forth. And I'm sure other commissioners will have other questions on some of the details, but I do have one weird question. I keep looking for this and I can't find it. At one of our early drafts, there was, the consultant, suggested a preference for white buildings and referenced the LEEDs, the LEEDS, code. It's not a code, but it's a system for environmental and energy efficiency. I don't think it fits very well in our ethic here. Haven't seen you guys repeat it, but I guess it was in the original draft of the code that we saw. And I wonder if you have any feelings on that.
So you're talking about light reflectivity, and I was the one, based on my experience with the Sustainability Committee, that made a recommendation that we slightly expand it. We're not talking about white buildings, but going up to 60%. But we felt as a committee that it was slightly outside of the housing element zoning amendments that we're considering right now. So we put that aside for future consideration.
Thank you.
So the current reflectivity values within the ordinance,
Say that again. You're cutting out.
probably because I'm mumbling. So, so the current light reflectivity values of 40% for siding and 50% for trim would continue to be, the rules within the town.
I think that's all I had questions on.
Okay. And we have, anybody else? Next, Ronnie? You look ready to go.
I wanted to start with revisiting a question I asked about in the last meeting. So I asked about if it was possible to kind of segment the objective standards to have one general set and then kind of alternative standards to support affordable housing developments. So like simpler standards for affordable housing. And the substitute council that we had, basically the just to paraphrase, the answer was that the California density bonus law is kind of a superior mechanism that the law is not only about density, it also effectively allows affordable housing developments to bypass a lot of the zoning codes. I'm paraphrasing. But I've communicated with some of the property owners, and I think they have pushed back on that a little bit, and there's a preference that it would actually be better if the zoning codes themselves had the sort of simpler standards established so that they did not have to go through the density bonus law. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I see what the ASCC is doing in terms of recommending simpler standards for single story and considering that for multi-story, which I think is in a similar vein of basically trying to support affordable housing with simpler objective standards. And so I just wanted to ask again and revisit that question of what is staff's opinion in terms of having that defined in the zoning code versus having applicants rely on density bonus law.
Catherine, did you want to start and I can join in?
Yeah, I suspect it with my colleague, Renee Ortega, who probably fielded this question at your last meeting. The state density bonus law is probably not going anywhere. I believe it's been in place since the 70s or 80s. And, any project that has a certain level of affordable units is entitled to density bonus, so extra units, as well as a number of waivers, concessions, incentives. There's sort of a complicated formula based on, the level of affordability for that project. I guess I would say it's always available. So whether one is better than the other, it could be that both apply actually. But I guess that doesn't really answer the question about whether it's better than simplifying the existing, standards that are before you this evening. I think I would probably pass it on to Adrian and the consulting team about, that question, but, does that answer much about density bonus law or
Sorry.
should I have, actually, why don't, Adrian, why don't you see if there's anything more you want to add in terms of the specific question about simplifying the current objective standards that are on, under consideration right now?
Right. So I understand that in terms of accessing the most permissiveness, I suppose, for a development project, it would be density bonus because there's a slew of concessions and waivers that you qualify for. But I understand the property owners have said, sure, we can access the process, but it's a long process, and it would simplify if we could have some of those, I don't want to call them concessions, but equivalent development standards perhaps that the property owner would otherwise request through density bonus process in the code. So I understand that part of it, that yes, it would simplify the process. So I think in this case, it would be up to Planning Commission to decide which of those quite permissive standards they want to incorporate for a given site. And we would take that direction.
Okay. The question is about, do we push forward with what at least the way I'm interpreting some of the ASCC's recommendations is establishing alternative objective standards for affordable housing to help enable affordable housing. And I'm just asking about the trade-off or the consideration between going that direction versus saying applicants can rely on state density bonus law to achieve the same outcome.
I think it's a policy decision.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Also, this might be kind of getting more into the discussion
Oh, yeah.
Good point.
topic as well.
Next question. We'll
Okay.
come back to that.
So in the staff report, there's some discussion about the existing town codes, like the lighting and I don't know, earth movement and stuff like that. And there's a comment in the case that a project in the new multifamily or mixed-use zones contains an element that triggers the discretionary review of one of these code sections, and so on. And I guess I was a little bit confused by that part of it. Basically, is it the case that those codes exist and if a project were to violate one of those codes, that would trigger the discretionary review? And then I didn't quite understand, is there a different scenario where projects are actually able to violate it and does, for some reason, doesn't trigger discretionary review? And sorry, if I could kind of add on, I mean, I see the ASCC is kind of recommending to incorporate some of these in objective standards. So is that necessary, or what's kind of staff's assessment about that situation?
So this question did come up at least one of the meetings, and just being, well, what about our existing ordinances? We have a grading ordinance, we have lighting, we have fencing. What happens to all of those? And so the reason why we're currently having to create a ministerial process for our new zones is in accordance with the Housing Crisis Act, which came into effect in 2020. So basically, any new development standards, new code has to afford a ministerial path. That said, a jurisdiction's existing municipal code, their existing ordinances, that if they were established prior to 2020, they remain in effect. If the town were to amend the lighting ordinance or, choose your ordinance, we would have to ensure that it is 100% discretionary and that there would be no ministerial review.
Objective.
Objective, thank you. Ooh. Sorry, okay,
Checking up on. us,
I know,
aren't
I
you?
know.
Making
Yeah.
sure we're listening.
you guys passed, very good. Apologies, so we would have to ensure that any amended ordinances would have to be non-discretionary and ministerial, so all objective. Fortunately, most of our ordinances, the examples I listed are fairly objective to begin with. But some of them, perhaps are a little bit more onerous. But the understanding we have is that those ordinances still apply. So in the case that you had a project with an amount of grading, cut and fill that exceeded the threshold at which would trigger discretionary review, we would still observe that discretionary process for that aspect of the project. So that's why I tried to clarify in the staff report to say we would segment the review. So we would subject the grading aspect of the project to discretionary review as is stipulated in our code. And the rest of the process would proceed through ministerial review according to our objective standards that we're currently establishing. And then there was a second part.
Well, I guess, so ASCC is kind of recommending to include some of those
Right.
in the zoning code, and so is that necessary?
So we've talked a little bit about this as well. The structure of the code is that it makes a lot of references to other sections. It's not great for readability because you're clicking around and flipping back and forth. But the code incorporates a lot of different sections by reference. And so our draft code does mimic that structure, even though it's not an ideal structure, because again, readability is kind of funny. But I think it's appropriate to stay within the structure and format of our existing code and incorporate different sections by reference. I don't think restating them is necessary in this case. So I think in cases where ASCC is maybe restating other sections of code, we could probably eliminate that just to streamline, because it's not how the rest of our code is set up. It's done according to reference.
Okay. For Glen Oaks, the ASCC had some comments about wanting to preserve the option of the owner keeping the horse operation and developing housing alongside it. And their suggestion was to zone it as mixed use to enable that. I actually asked Laura about this when we were considering the housing element over a year ago now. And she, in the reply at that time, referenced planned unit developments as a way of achieving that. And yeah, so just in general, what do we need to do, if anything, to kind of preserve options on Glen Oaks? Does it need to be mixed use, or is planned unit development a preferred option there?
Yeah, I would echo former director Laura Russell's comments on that. We did work cooperatively with the property owner of Stanford on deciding upon this zoning designation. And so we certainly wouldn't want to make a change like that hastily. But more to the point, I don't think it's necessary. I think that we can certainly incorporate the continued function of the horse farm if that's what the owner so desires, we can do it.
Okay. I guess I didn't quite understand. So basically for the LAR, the landscape area ratio, it seems to be that, and maybe this question can be for the ASCC as well as staff, but it seems to be the way ASCC has set it up is that there's the coverage area ratio of the building, then there's the impervious area ratio, and essentially whatever is left over is the landscape area ratio. And so it seems to be the case that it's redundant with those. If you know the CAR and the IAR, then the LAR is just what's left over. I don't quite understand why we need to add the LAR. Who wants to jump in?
Just, can we start? I can call upon our consultant Monica because she analyzed this actually, or did you guys want to start ASCC?
Philosophically, that's where we started. Was with wanting to make sure that we, preserved open space. And that open space, was of value, so that it was about the protection, of heritage tree canopies, the protection of open space, between the buildings that wouldn't be, paved or impervious surface. And to also then, try to balance those numbers, so that it didn't force, higher, more, taller, more dense buildings in order to do that. But it was a philosophical thing. I can see why you think it's redundant. I don't think that, that level of redundancy, isn't good. That's my personal opinion.
There's no difference. It really is redundant. If you just leave, a dirt patch, don't put any tree, it's just the ugliest set of weeds. That gets to count as LAR, or I imagined LAR meant there was a tree or a nice plant there, but maybe I jumped.
Well, we're trying to quickly get to, a set of objective standards. I think that, defining what that landscape area, is, to us, in our discussions, it was about, preservation of natural area or landscape area. It was not, the protection of an old dump site, or, a patch of weeds, unless that patch of weeds, was native and natural. If it was a Scotch broom,
Yeah.
broom pile, so we didn't get, it's a lot of stuff.
I mean, I guess, wouldn't it need to be defined and it would need to be objective?
Or that's what I'm wondering too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a definition of that, what qualifies as landscape area, should be defined.
Okay.
Actually called that out in what you sent us this afternoon, but yeah.
I think we described it in, it may not be in,
Yeah, I think they did.
it was described in what are, in the summaries. The summaries actually explain a lot of the motivation at the same time.
I wanted to add, sort of what I told you when we exchanged emails, Ronnie, was that by adding an LAR, it requires the developer to have sort of an intentional, they know that the town has an intentional purpose in having that there, so that they put a little bit more thought into how they're going to either preserve the existing landscape or actually make some changes or provide the screening that's necessary for these multifamily properties. So it's sort of an intentional thing, because it's really key to Portola Valley is the landscaping and the preservation of the natural environment. So by having it there, it kind of requires that they track that, and they're more intentional about it. The other thing is that we had put in there the idea of also, this is a multifamily projects. So there's an idea of creating common space, common landscaped space for residents that are living in very tight communities to be able to interact with each other. So part of that was to include, a certain percentage that is required to be common, because in other situations where you have a row of townhomes that you see in Menlo Park or Redwood City, everybody has their little fenced off front yard and their little fenced off backyard, and there's no sense of common space. And given that this is for MF23 in particular, it's such a high density, there's not going to be possibility of having these little patchwork, little tiny private yards everywhere. So it becomes extremely important for the residents to be able to have larger common landscaped areas where they can enjoy, their children can run around or whatever, that's not broken up into little spaces. So by having those two kind of different numbers, it forces the developer to really think that through.
I'm good unless you want to comment.
I was just going to add that an alternative way that we could handle it is to have the max impervious surface, the coverage area ratio, and then anything left over could be required to be landscaped. The only thing is
Right.
you,
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, the only thing is you would maybe get little bits and bobs of space that even if it's landscaped, isn't really usable by residents. So in that case, we would probably want to recommend requirements for minimum landscaped area, like dimensions. You know,
But
you
it-
need,
This was something I was confused about in our last meeting, but the word landscape, but I guess what I understood from the ASCC is it's explicitly not their intent, but it's developed landscape. It can also be natural, open space. Is that right?
That was our intention, that it could be, native area, it could be meadow area, it could be, the canopy underneath, heritage, trees. Where you really don't want landscape, but that would be part of that preserve.
And then I guess my other question, I think Rebecca just touched on, but where the requirement for comment space was added, and at least when I read that at first, I thought it would include all common space, including like driveways and parking areas and stuff like that, which I think was not your intent. And I'm
That
seeing
was
shaking
not
up.
our,
Right, okay. So we'll probably just need to define that as well. Yeah. For unit sizes, it says including any garage space. How will this work if there's a shared garage? I guess question to Adrian, will we need to define that?
I think we would, I would put it to ASCC to ask if they'd considered that arrangement.
Yeah, I assumed if they ended up having garage underground, which for these particular cases, I doubt it's going to happen, but I would assume that you would just take a square footage for that particular space that's assigned to that particular townhome or that condo or whatever, or that apartment, and assign it to the same building, to the same unit. But I don't know how typical these multifamily homes are built and how they range that. So I would have to, that would be a question that the planning department and the consultants would need to answer.
Sure, and if we have direction from planning commission, we can look into best practices and standard ways of defining that.
Okay. So there's, in the ACC proposal, there's, the section about proposing simple standards for single-story buildings and potentially multi-story buildings. I guess I wanted to understand staff's opinion about the relationship between that and our housing element program 4-3, which is about establishing a permitting process for modular and manufactured homes.
Yeah, my understanding is that ASCC just wants to ensure that if we have an application for a simpler style of project, small, single-story cottage-style homes, that the design standards proposed aren't overly onerous. And in particular, I think it was the window requirements and the entrance requirements that were thought to be too onerous for a simple single-story cottage-style format, or maybe modular could be. So staff analyzed it, and we think we could work in just a sort of simpler set of requirements of architectural details that we would require for single-story homes. I don't think that's too difficult for us to do if DC would like to direct us on that. I don't think I would call it, because we do have program 4-3, and we're going to look into establishing a permitting process for modular and manufactured homes. So we do have that on our list. I don't think that the standards as drafted and as will be amended by Planning Commission are going to prohibit those types of products, and they shouldn't be prohibiting those types of products. But because modular and manufactured products are very specific. We could benefit from just having a simpler process where we won't have to interpret so much, you know, because a lot of these projects sort of come in a fixed format. And so it might be a little bit hard for us to interpret design elements and, oh, do they fit in? Do they satisfy the objective standards? So it would just be an opportunity to develop a program that helps even further clarify, further streamline. But I don't think we're in any kind of risk territory right now that we couldn't permit a modular project with our current draft code.
I see. I have two quick questions about the supportive housing overlay. Is it okay to ask those with regard to recusals? I kind of feel.
I think we said you can answer, you ask the questions, and if you think there's, you just don't stray into
Don't stray into
discussion.
discussion, right.
We should be good.
Okay, so is my understanding correct that for 4394 Alpine, which is under the supportive housing overlay, that it can use the standards that are defined in the housing element to, I don't know if to use the word bypass, but essentially bypass the mixed use zoning codes. Is that right?
Yeah, the supportive housing overlay was established after, in consultation with the property owner, and our former town attorney, former director as well, just to ensure that we had an even further simplified process for development standards. So certainly the housing element, any specified development standards in the housing element stand. So it's important that our zoning code does not contradict. And even if we accidentally did contradict it, anything in the housing element would trump. So that comes first and foremost.
Okay. And at least, so in the ASCC proposals, there have been some proposed changes to the supportive housing overlay. And in their update, a lot of those were removed, but I think there still are some changes. And so just, I wanted to ask either in terms of the scope of our current effort or process-wise, what is your reaction to making changes to the supporting housing overlay itself?
Yeah, my understanding is, as ASCC went along and further researched the housing element, they understood the interplay and how standards established in the housing element come first. So I'm not sure, I'll call upon ASCC after to ask if there's any remaining recommendations. But at this time, I would recommend against making any changes to the supportive housing overlay because it rests in our housing element. And at this time, we should not be altering our housing element. Least of all because we're out of compliance and we really do want to ensure that we get our zoning amendments into HCD and we can have a timely review and reinstatement of our certification. It would be no small thing to reopen the housing element. It's not impossible, but we would have to resubmit to HCD review and that's its own kettle of fish. So recommendation would be against doing any alterations at this time.
Okay. That's it for me.
Ann, you're looking at me, you ready?
I am, but
Unless you want to fight
I'm,
Nicholas.
no, I'm fine.
No.
Or-
Arm wrestle? Arm wrestle? She was ready.
Adrian, in our housing element, we've zoned different properties, different numbers, 23 dwelling units per acre, 4 units. Am I right that the way we've written it, in all cases, they are maximums as opposed to bracketed? If we, whenever we do zoning, we don't make any property owner build anything, they can build 0. So even in the 23 dwelling units per acre, if somebody wants to build 2 units, they're allowed by our zoning. Okay, that'll give us a different problem with our housing element in the state because our numbers might not add up after a while, but legally they can build anything underneath these numbers.
Put it quite like that. I would say that certainly a landowner can submit an application for their desired development. we have zoning minimums in place, and that's what our commitment is to HCD. It may be the case, though, that circumstances have changed. Perhaps a landowner just cannot meet those minimum densities anymore. And I think in that case, we would have to think carefully about it. But, you know, if the option is 0 units or less units than we plan for in our housing element, then we would have to, we should work with that. As you pointed out, we immediately bump into no net loss law. And that means that if we do not pick up the units on a site that we've planned for, we have to find another site to make up for that shortfall. So we get fewer units on a site, but still units, great, that's important, but we are faced with another problem of making up those units elsewhere.
Right, so I definitely understand the no net loss and we have that problem. But where is the minimums here? Because when I was looking at the table, I read it as a maximum. And I just bring this up because some of us were confused. Property owners are changing what they might want to do. And then my question is, well, can we simplify our zoning? We accommodate what's in our housing element, 23 dwelling units per acre. But if they're legally allowed to do anything below that, well, we've covered their new plan, haven't we?
I'll call on you, Catherine, to talk about this idea of legally allowed to build below the minimum density. How would you characterize it?
Yeah, I would say that we're gonna have to rezone the property to be a different minimum density. So, you know, it used to be that densities were maximums, you know, up to 20 units per acre. However, under fairly new state law and as a result of not meeting some of the state deadlines for our housing element, the town was subjected to these minimum density requirements for sites where we're targeting affordable units. And for that reason, if a developer comes along and wants to do something less than the minimum density, my understanding is that the town would have to rezone that site to be a lower minimum density than what's in our current zoning and general plan and housing element. And at the same time, the town would likely have to upzone another property to make up for that no net loss situation and the shortfall.
Oh, okay, that's helpful and a bummer.
Yeah, I understand
so-
that.
Yeah. Where do I find these minimum numbers on the, can I call it 4 properties that we're trying to redo the zoning for? So Ladera Church is 23 per acre. Glen Oaks is 4. 4370 is,
They're all defined as min and max, right? It's not 23, it's 20 to 23.
that one's 20 to 23. I see in the table
And
for the
It's in the
housing element.
table, yeah. The first line of of all the tables has the unit density, minimum and maximum.
I see. I was looking at another table that only had the max. Okay.
I think it's table
Thanks.
6-6 adequate sites.
Yeah.
That's in the housing element.
Yes, in the housing element, that's
It-
correct.
Okay,
It's
thanks.
also in
I'll
the
go over
zoning.
that again. Okay.
Right.
My next question is, when you, in all these contexts, use the words affordable, and like the ASCC had some suggestions of affordable percentage of units that are affordable, that's a reserved word legally, right? It means it has to be deed restricted for the 55 years? Is that true, or it can be more casual definition?
Catherine, do you
Yeah,
mind?
that's definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, so generally speaking, yeah, when we're talking about affordable units that are below market rate, they are generally deed restricted. And yes, 55 years tends to be the magic number for those deed restrictions. I would say that I would not recommend, as I think we as staff would not recommend including this affordable housing obligation in the zoning code for a couple of reasons. One is the town's working sort of on a separate track on updating its inclusionary housing and its below market rate housing requirements as well. And so that's one reason. And then in addition, you know, that I don't want to pull numbers out of the air in terms of what the percentage should be to ensure that projects, you know, are feasible. Generally, those percentages need to be based on, you know, analysis, feasibility analysis. So that's my, I don't know, Adrian, do you have anything more to add to that?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
And then this question's maybe for everybody in the room. Do we wish we had another word that's not affordable, because that's a reserved legal word, but one that refers to a property owner that wants to build lower cost, less fancy finish units, that but they don't want to do the deed restriction on them. I thought of this when Ronnie was asking, could we have a simpler path for simpler buildings? And the answer was, well, you could use state density bonus law, but those only refer to affordable units, right? Might we also want a process that's for some low cost or lower cost units? That's just a question as I thought about what our zoning rules are.
I'll just take a stab at this, and Adrian, feel free to augment what I have to say. But a lot of times in this context, you talk about affordable with a capital A and affordable with a lowercase a. Lowercase a generally not deed restricted necessarily, but rather affordable by design. And that typically, you know, is about the size of the unit and whether it's for ownership purposes or for rental purposes.
I see. That's good. It does make me a little nervous to count on a capital A and a little a and doing the editing right and everybody reading it, understanding which is which, but I get it. I had some detailed questions for ASCC. I guess I'll ask them now, even though depending on our path, we might be more or less relevant. You all had things like minimum common space would have a square footage, and then you'd say, comma, included in the landscape area. Am I right though, the common space could be impervious, like, you know, shuffleboard court? Seen that in Florida. Then it wouldn't be part of the landscape, right? Or did common space always mean plants?
Good question.
Okay, we could, if I wanted to know your intent. You don't
I
have
think in the time we had available,
Yeah.
we weren't able to get into that kind of a detail.
Yeah, okay.
Your intent would be to sort that out.
No, I
Okay,
could
fine.
say that I wouldn't want to have the square footage that was devoted to common space to be taken up by a big tennis court or a great big shuffleboard court or whatever. So I think part of it would definitely have to be green.
I think our priority for common space, you know, was about landscape, you know, wasn't about, you know, impervious surface.
Mhm, okay.
In general, the impervious surface limits, you know, are, as we propose them, are quite restrictive.
So,
And, you know, in some of, you know, in our mathematical modeling, you know, it's enough, but it's not generous in any way, you know, to create court space or basketball courts or, you know, effectively the, you know, the parking lots in the MF 23, you know, are covered. The walkways to and from the units are covered. You know, small patios would be covered, but there wouldn't be space, you know, for accessory uses.
not yet. Then you had some minimum and maximum square footage areas, which I was in favor of, but they were all different, like in one section, 400 and 1,800 and the other one, 500 to, I forgot, 2,500. What was the thinking in coming up with those different numbers? They all had numbers. Tell me what your thinking was to come up with them each place. I mean, did you just pull them out of a hat? You can tell me that, that's okay.
It wasn't out of a hat. It was really relative to the zoning district, you know, and relative, you know, to kind of the size of buildings, you know, and how we felt the mix, you know, would be assembled. The minimums and the maximums are smaller in the MF 23 zoning district, you know, than they would be in the MF 4. Really because of the size of the property relative, you know, to the, you know, to the allowable
Mhm.
number of units.
But I think one of, like, one was 400 to 1,800. I think another one, you know, they were both outside like 300 to 2,500.
It was about, you know, how we felt the assemblage, you know, of the diagram or the building, you know, would come together. You know, it's also trying to be responsive, you know, to the discussion we've had, you know, with the planning consultants and staff, you know, about the fair housing, you know, range. And so that we could end up with, you know, a range of bedroom sizes, a range of large enough living space, you know, versus, you know, how small the smallest units could be.
So for Stanford, for the Glen Oaks, we reviewed what they're doing, their plans are for the wedge. And those sizes fit in on the higher scale exactly with what they're doing over there. So we felt that if they were planning that, they felt it was a good size for their faculty units, then we felt that that was probably what they'd be doing at Glen Oaks as well. And we didn't really want to encourage them to put in big fancy buildings there.
Okay, good.
We wanted to avoid sizes that, you know, would start to feel like luxury housing.
Oh, good. See, I can't put my finger on it, but I saw places that said the rent restricted like to a single room. And I just wondered why it said single room and not the whole unit.
This is a mixed use, so I think I can just answer a question, right? So I had extensive discussions with Mr. White about his project. And if you look in the housing element and it talks about the supportive housing overlay, there's a bunch of options he's considering. And unfortunately, the definition that HCD applies for a housing unit that gets to be counted by Portola Valley as a housing unit is a little different than what part of what his vision might be in wanting to provide either supportive housing or housing for more inclusive housing for people who have different disabilities that may not be intellectual. So one of his visions about his housing project is the idea of having a larger building, one story with a series of living units that would be perhaps a private bathroom, a private bedroom, and perhaps sort of a very limited like dorm room type, you know, modest sort of you can't call it a full kitchen type of facility. So HCD would not consider that a unit. It wouldn't be considered like an ADU or even a junior ADU or an internal ADU. So that's why this supportive housing overlay was put in place, because the definition that HCD applies to a unit is different than what he would like to have flexibility to potentially develop, because he wants to be able to potentially provide a larger building with maybe 8 people living there or something, along with providing supportive other functions like a common room, a larger kitchen, you know, a dining room, a gym, whatever, within one building. So that's where we kind of fall into this very complex supportive housing overlay because of the different definitions of what a unit is. I mean, it could be simplified by just saying, you know, raising the funds to be able to have every single room have one of those little tiny kitchenettes that fits into a little closet, and then all of a sudden we get to count that as an ADU. But, you know, it adds expense, obviously, for something that people may not actually ever need or use. So we
Okay,
have to
that's
be
fine.
respectful
Thanks.
of that.
And there was one place, I can't put my finger on it right now, but the maximum was 4,574 square feet. Kind of a bad reaction to these things that look so specific. Is there a reason it wasn't 4,600 or did it?
That happened to be the exact double of what the maximum unit size was in order to afford the ability for Stanford to create a duplex. So it happened to be twice the size.
Actually, Adrienne, I have another question for you. This might be too broad. I'm feeling like there's a lot of, this person says one thing, that person says another in regards to 4370. We don't have any other agreement or documents to go back and rely on what was decided or discussed with the neighbors and the owner.
I wouldn't characterize it so formally as an agreement or, you know what I mean, or a contract. There was extensive good faith negotiations with the landowners and town staff to ensure that they were in a comfortable place with what we were proposing to do with the upzoning. And the base development standards that we were exploring that we outlined in the housing element. And we also wanted to do a realistic analysis of what landowners were potentially willing to develop. And so it was based on a lot of those conversations that we got to an estimated unit count for those sites. And that's what you see represented in our adequate sites table in the housing element and in our arena. And then also as part of that, there was negotiations with surrounding neighbors as well. We were trying to ensure that everybody could generally foresee a development according to those standards, and we're okay with them. So I would characterize it as, you know, good faith discussions.
And is it reasonable to ask, are there any email threads that we can look at that capture what you just said?
Catherine, can I ask you how you might respond to that?
I was actually gonna click my camera on just to note that this might be getting a little more into discussion of that site. So we may just want to put a pin in this discussion if we could, and
That's fine.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay,
we can do that.
that's all my questions. Thank you.
Can I ask
Oh, you don't-
one follow-up question to Anne's questions about the common space? Like she wants shuffleboard, she really wants pickleball probably.
That's what I really, that's what I'm really aiming
Which
at.
we would both want. But I mean, are you thinking like maybe a park bench, maybe a little, we called it tan bark when I was in grade school with a slide or anything like that? Or are you really thinking of it as just I don't know, unfettered? I mean,
I mean,
I
I could
worry
see,
about,
I
as
could
you
see
know,
a
and
small
for-
playground. I
Huh?
could see that as being
Yeah,
a possibility.
okay.
Good.
Good.
I do think that, you know, rational things, you know, for the support of, you know, social interaction, you know, enjoyment of open space, you know, would be the kinds of things, you know, that we would, you know, typically see in a landscape. You know, what we were not anticipating and planned actually against was, you know, pickleball courts, tennis courts, you know, we didn't think about, you know, shuffleboard, but kind of the same thing is that, you know, it's a broad area of paved area that is likely not to be used hardly at all, if ever. I mean, if there's a rational use, you know, I think there's all kinds of ways to deal with that as you go forward. But at this point, you know, the rules were more about protecting the town and making sure that the developments, you know, were more likely to be rural in nature, you know, than urban.
I like your phrase, social interaction space. Okay, it's a lot more than common space, sorry.
That's all right. It's Nicholas, I think you're up.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna play the part of the ignorant child. Because it seems to be that kind of deal. So let me start there. For 4370, isn't 4370 expressly dealt with in the housing element?
There's there's general development standards that are laid out. Yep. We don't deal with minimum lot size. That's something we have to solidify. And then, of course, when we get into objective design standards, that we don't contemplate at all in the housing element.
But the general uses are defined in the housing element?
Yes,
Okay, I just want to be clear, and you aren't at this point revising the housing. Element. Is that right?
correct.
Good. I feel enlightened. Oh, so thank you. With respect to the common space is as reading it, looked like it was a subdivision of LAR, right? Yeah. And LAR is a defined term talking about sort of the natural character of it, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and that doesn't include, for example, impervious surfaces, right? It's like it's different, for example, than open space, which is a broadly defined term, which could include impervious surfaces.
Yeah, we didn't define open space.
That's right, but it is a defined term. But LAR, for example, is described as a natural space. So,
But I do think that there would be things, for social interaction, support, whether they're places to sit or benches or, picnic tables, that would be a part of that. Playground equipment would be a part of that.
right, so you could, and it's not saying that you can't have it, but the LAR is the portion of the land that must either be retained as natural area, including existing tree root protection area zones or landscape that is neither building nor covered with impervious surface, right?
That was how we defined it.
Yeah, so the question then, that's helpful. So when we're talking about potentially other uses, not to pick on pickleball, but that would require a modification, for example, of the definition either of common space or of LAR. Right.
I mean, it would be, it would be a paved area or impervious surface.
Yeah,
Under
seems
the
to me that
definition
would,
as we've described.
yeah.
So
Good,
you-
so that's helpful. I was looking at, on, sorry, it's PDF, not page 9, 18.15.050. This is the development standards. And it provides for modest exceptions provided by ASCC. I didn't understand what a modest exception was.
I think what we were looking for, the way, for lower density, smaller projects of lesser height, to have an easier path. So it really is, specifically in response, to the public communication and private communications, with the one property that's being rezoned, to the MF 23. To me, I have a lot of concerns. This is my personal opinion as an ASCC member, that, with the desires of that property, the financial ability, the existing topography, and the existing trees, that the density proposed is going to be a big. And I have been working to try to make something rational, simpler, and more in keeping with, their desires, because from from this commissioner's point of view, Ladera Community Church's desire to do something positive should be extraordinarily supported. And that the rules, in order to meet the HCD's requirements, shouldn't dissuade them or make it impossible, because at that point you get zero rather than some. So that's why we were looking for ways to ameliorate, soften, give rational exceptions. So that was, because we were looking at smaller modular buildings, that are like some others that are, that Habitat has done, elsewhere in California. So it's really just trying to be responsive to the community, because I think what they're planning is actually more in keeping with what cost effective, not a small A affordable, is more likely to be, because of the cost and complexity of construction and approvals in California, which has gotten out of hand.
I'm not sure I disagree with anything that you've said. It's a matter of policy, or is a general matter, or in the specific. I think that during discussion, it would be useful to talk about other ways of achieving that using existing state law, for example, SB4, or simply electing to use a waiver. And
If I could, through the chair, the reason that we indicated the ASCC is because almost every project is going to end up with the ASCC as the final decision maker, because the site development permit requires the ASCC review and approval for any project that moves more than 100 cubic yards of dirt. So it's not an onerous project process, because if you dig up 50 cubic yards of dirt and you put 50 cubic yards of dirt back, you're in front of the ASCC, under the current site development. So, to have some level of exceptions without having to use density law, it just seemed like the right thing to do. And so that's why we as a subcommittee of the ACC were working.
Okay.
And I think.
Let's cover that more in discussion. We're probably just moving a little further than we should on that.
Sure.
Yeah. So similarly, just looking at the design standards for a single story, and that was similarly to create a simpler avenue for development. Getting back to my ignorance, can you help me understand what a daylight plane is and what a theoretical plane is? Theoretical plane sounds, sounds like maybe it used to be illicit.
Well, the town of Portola Valley in the, in the R1 zoning district, has a requirement, that on the sides of the property, there's a line that extends from the ground, at a 1 horizontal to 2, vertical line, that extends, from the natural grade, up, and that nothing is supposed to stick out of it. No building parts, no chimneys, no roofs, unless it's less than 17 feet tall. And it's a planning tool, that has been developed in suburban California mostly, to protect against, overbearing intrusions of privacy, particularly when the ground plane is falling away from the building. So that it actually advances the setback for taller buildings away from, from the property line. And it would appear that would make sense in Portola Valley because it's an existing planning. It doesn't restrict development. It just moves development further away from the property line than a strict setback line.
I don't have anything further.
All right. Should we take a short break and then come to questions?
Public comment?
Public comments, yeah. Public comment. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break then. All righty, we're back in attendance. It is time for public comment. I will probably check with my fellow planning commissioners after public comment, see if there's any particular questions they thought were relevant that we might doubly ask if anybody has an answer to. And so let's go to public comment. And actually, I might actually call on Tim first, just because he did have a letter that came in that went to the town council that's actually relevant to us. So I've asked him if he can kind of summarize that for us as part of his public comment.
Thank you, John. And as I indicated earlier, this may take longer than 3 minutes, so I'll try to keep it as short as possible. Before I get to that letter, I want to say thank you to the ASCC and the people who are here tonight because they worked very diligently to do this whole simplification for small projects thing, which was specifically for our benefit. And really appreciate it. Both Carter and Rebecca have been very responsive, and we've had extended conversations by email. I think that's what you were referring to as both public and private communications. Thank you. A letter from our church council and our moderator, that's the lay leader who's the highest in the church, is a letter that describes some problems that we are having with this code and with the situation here in Portola Valley. And we are asking for some timely assistance on several issues that are impeding our project of up to 6 units for our half-acre parcel, which is incidentally has been recognized the only place that's been given this RM20, MF20 and 23. The problem with that zoning is it's completely inappropriate for what we want to do. The zoning, as I read it in the code, allows us to build on our half-acre either 2 or 10 or 11 units. There's a big donut in the middle there, and that's where we want to be. We want to be between 2 and 10. The second point is that we're not sure, aside from what's the town is doing in zoning, we're not sure that we're going to be able to do any project at all. We have a letter that came in October from I have to read the name, the Westridge Area Supervisory Committee, WASC. And WASC is a neighborhood association which enforces deed restrictions in Westridge. I'm sure there are other places where that happens in town too. They stated that we couldn't do any multifamily housing on that because of deed restrictions in Westridge. Now, they might be correct about that under their 1946 deed restrictions, which incidentally also prevented any non-Caucasians from living in Westridge. So I think they need to own the whole thing. But the letter also does not pay any attention to recent California legislation in the last year or two that encourages affordable housing, and especially on church-owned sites. The most recent law is dubbed the Yes in God's Backyard law. SB4 in the last session, it was signed and enacted. So we're asking for the town for some help with that. And lastly, we've had some discussions with the people at your committee. What do we call it again? ASCC. I'm sorry, it doesn't trip off the tongue unless you're a regular in these places. I'm afraid. we're concerned about the complexity and the unnecessary costs that may be in there. As I said, ASCC has been quite responsive in trying to simplify them for a small project like ours. But I think the principle is the more requirements you put in, the more cost you're putting in. And one of the discussions that I had with Rebecca was, is there supposed to be a 3-foot porch over the front door, and can it be a trellis? Well, I don't know how to resolve. I don't have an opinion about that. Is it 3 feet or should it be 2 feet or maybe 18 inches? I don't know. The more detail, the more cost. I'm glad that the ASCC, I said it this time, is able to, is willing to address these things. So we have 3 specific requests for assistance from the town. And the first one is to amend the MF 23 zoning as applies to our property, or create a new zone that would allow us to build in that donut between 2 and 10 units. The second one is for asking the town's assistance in negotiating with WASC, the Westridge organization, that would, in a way that would benefit Portola Valley's promises and commitments to do affordable housing, our church, and hopefully the Westridge of Westridge as well. And the third point has to do, I think I've discovered in the third point in the letter has to do with the inclusionary fund, or the affordable housing fund that the town has created. And it seems to me that the rules are not very clear. I think the rules may have been clarified in December. I'm not certain when the town adopted something. But clarifying the rules is different than issuing the money. And I think we've all heard Jim White say a number of times that he's applied and been denied. So we'd like some clarity from the town about that. And what I want to say, and I'm going to read the last sentence of the letter, to keep our parcel in the town's housing element inventory, we ask that you provide us a written response by June 15th of 2024 of your intentions to addressing our concerns and for the resolution of these 3 issues. So that's mostly what we say in the letter.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You sort of, we have you in the general public comment section, but obviously as somebody who's actually trying to do housing, you're somewhat more than the regular general public there. But having said that, let's go to the general public for comments. I think I'll go to online first. And I see a hand up from Dave Cardinal.
John, thank you. First of all, I think it's great that we're having this meeting. It'd be better if we had it a year ago, maybe, but it's wonderful. I do think that we, to Tim's point and Jim's point that he's made repeatedly, we've got the wrong end of the telescope, in that we're all worried about shuffleboard courts. And the truth is, we will be really fortunate to have people like Tim and Jim and Patty actually want to build affordable housing in our town. And the default is no one's going to build here. I mean, we're not talking about a Four Seasons hotel. So we need to court them, cuddle them. And so I'm really happy with what Carter and I guess Gina and Rebecca and all have done. And I think the goal has to be, before it's brought back and approved, it needs to be kind of signed off by, okay, this is good. We can build under these conditions. Otherwise, we have nothing. We're not rezoning the wedge, which we could do. Let Stanford actually say, okay, we're going to give you the zoning you want, maybe in exchange for some more affordable housing somewhere else in the site. But we're not doing that. We're not rezoning Dorothy Ford Park. We're not rezoning any of our land or anything else. So these are the people now. And Thies obviously is not happy with whatever. So if we as a community want to A, build affordable housing, and B, present HCD with a plausible plan for it, then I think we need to get people to sign on And it's in our interest, I don't know, it's just, they're not developers, they're evangelists, they're missionaries, they're people who want to do stuff. And I think we need to coddle and cuddle them and think about, it's such a labor of love that, and money, that, the church could sell the lot and build 100 Africa libraries or something. I mean, they don't have to build 6 houses in Portola Valley. So the more we can do to encourage that dynamic and treat them as a customer instead of burying them in minutia, because they're not, especially churches aren't, they don't have tons of lawyers and zoning people and all that. It's not what they're about. They're not about fighting lawsuits and variances. So the more we can do to treat them as our customers and our rare resource and go from there and encourage other people, I think the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Does anybody in the room, would you like to make a public comment? Yep, come on up. Name and address, if you don't mind.
I'll ask for extra time and Dan is willing to grant that to me.
No. We do not do extra time trading back and forth.
We have done this before.
No, it's been done once or twice. I don't allow it as the chair.
Okay, that's fine. I'll spend 15, 20 seconds on the agreement or the lack of agreement. And that was done because the town was talking to the owner of 4370. We were talking as the neighbors about what was going on. We talked to, in fact, Ann Topsill was there for one of the discussions. When it was all done, there were agreements made that if we did this, somebody else would do that. And if you look at the housing element, you'll see what the final result was. And those were public hearings and everybody saw what was there. And if there was a discussion, that would be time to have the discussion. So I'm not going to spend any more time on the housing element, but the housing element, I do want to spend one more thing on the housing element, and that is that I'm very appreciative of the ASCC reading the housing element and putting that back into the matrix, this appendix matrix. It was much different the first time that we saw it. The second, actually, there are 2 items I have. One of them is about the 1 story that's in the housing element for housing. And we are all in favor of housing going onto that site, 4370, the backside. I just want to make sure everybody knows the neighbors are in favor of housing going in there. It doesn't mean that housing will go in. It's multi-use. And so one of the things I would ask you to do is if there is a structure that goes in there, because for housing, it's 1 story, 30 feet off the street, that there be any structure off the street. And the reason I bring that up, if you're going to put in a dental medical building, I'd like it not to be 2 stories next to the street, because it will create an entry into the Portola Valley, into Nathhorst area. That's going to be kind of a channel, and we'd like to see it much more residential. So that's the first item. The second one is that in the matrix that you have on area, there's a discussion in there about 0.88, which is really an odd number, 0.88. Where did that come from? You were handed a document 2 meetings ago that had a proposal for 3 sites, and in it, there was a subdivision that was divided at 0.88. That was purely arbitrary. That there's no requirement that 0.88 be used for anything. It was suggestion. And since you already have a 1 acre minimum in that area, there's no reason for that 0.88 to be in there. So all we'd ask is that the 1 acre minimum be maintained. When subdivision comes up and there's a discussion, we can have a discussion about what needs to be done or any variances that you want. But to put a variance in the zoning code seems to be premature. So those are my comments. I don't need any extra time.
No, thank you very much.
You want to say your name? I don't think you did.
Sorry?
I don't think you stated your name. I don't know if you
Oh,
want to.
Bob Adams, 11 Applewood.
I cut them off before you got there.
Anything you can do for pickleball?
Oh, that's you. Oh, okay. All right, let's see. I'm going to do one more online and then I'll come back to you, sir. let's do Carolyn Vertonghen has her hand up, I see.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the residents for speaking up, and really thank you, ASCC, for creating the summary. But as we all noticed tonight, there's still so much confusion. As Linda Brother said, let's put as many details in the draft as possible. We don't want any speculation. Ronnie, yes, we would like to make it simpler for certain projects, but what we have said all along, we want to make sure that affordable housing is not compromising safety. And so we have discussed these projects, and they wanted to make them cost effective, and we constantly said, make sure that, we're not cutting corners because safety is most important. There's still some discussion about common space. And that leads to the email that I sent earlier to you guys, the Planning Commission, and also to Adrian Smith. A common space, what is that? When we saw the document in March, it had garage, parking, landscaping, bicycle storage, driveways. We had a whole number of new nomination for buildings that we had never heard before. And then today we see a redacted summary. So we got a new timeline, but we need to know when the other issues will be discussed. If this is, by May 22nd, you have to give us a timeline. We need to put our input. BPTS is involved in it, but we need a timeline to give us our comments. But thank you very much. We need a collaborative effort. And unfortunately, again, we're a little, we're closer, but we're not there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please come up, sir.
Bill Russell, 200 Northwest Avenue. And you asked a question, are there any emails or other such materials that can be examined to determine what the agreement is? If you have any question about it, my suggestion is that you ask Cara Silver, you ask Laura Russell exactly what was agreed to. They were there, they know. Mr. Tark, you asked whether or not the housing element discussed in any detail what is to be developed at 4370. The answer is yes. If you look at page 129 and page 130 of the housing element, it's all laid out. When the Lisa Wise consulting report was produced with specific recommendations for zoning, it was on all fours with everything that was in the housing element. When we received the first version of the comments from ASCC, it was directly at odds with what was in the housing element and what was in the Lisa Wise consulting. ASCC has graciously withdrawn those comments, apologized for not more carefully reviewing them, and now we have the new comments from ASCC. That's fine, except that there is so much detail in the new recommendations that is almost virtually impossible for a layperson such as myself, or I happen to know Bob Adams, to figure out what can and cannot be developed on that property. So we've had discussions, should we hire an architect to explain all of this to us? I'm the first to admit there are benefits to having specificity, to have a roadmap. But when it is in this language, in this way, is it really helpful, or is it more harmful for us to try and understand how that property can be developed? I don't have an answer to that question. I just pose the question. It's something that I'd like to have a conversation with Adrian in the future about. It's just for your consideration. That's it.
Thank you very much. Let's see, online. Oh, I see Jim White online. Jim, looks like you're next up.
Thank you. Let's see, I can try to make 3 points. First is, I'm speaking as the owner of 4394 Alpine. I'm the biggest property line owner that borders 4370 Rich Thiesing's lot. I'm his neighbor. I disagree with the characterization that some particular neighbors, whether it's Bill or Bob, have negotiated unilaterally for neighbors' rights with that property. I had direct discussions with Rich in the town. It's actually reflected in what the rear setback is. This was not a generalized agreement with one party representing all the neighbors. So I'll leave it at that. The ASCC did the update. I have to say, I think it's I appreciate the response to some of our concerns. At first glance, it really looks good. So thank you for helping and responding. Point number 3 is the urgency and risk that keeps being talked about is really our own making here. And I think we forget about it so often. And so I actually went back and looked, and the 2 critical town council decisions that were made that has put us in this situation is the January 23rd town council, when the town council decided to separate the housing element and the zoning work. And we're obviously living the consequences of that right now. It also, by not filing on January 31st that month, which was another decision that was made there, that actually triggered the minimum becoming the maximum, which is the Ladera problem that you're facing right now. And it's also the reason that we pulled 4394 from that zoning code, because of the high minimum. The next decision that was made was in March 23 at the town council meeting, with 2 council members that wanted an additional 30 days to go work on Glen Oaks, which didn't take 30 days, and we missed the 120-day grace window if they had done that. And so that triggered the fact that the zoning had to be done on January 31st, 24. And that was known in May 1 last year. So we're sitting here understaffed, and we have this urgency to get this done on multiple decisions that we have made. And I just don't think we are learning as an organization or as a community about the consequences to the things that we're doing and how they're stacking up. So what I'm worried about here is the first draft of the zoning code was dropped on everyone, including the ASCC and the Planning Commission, in addition to the community and property owners, on 3/20, just a few weeks ago. There's been a flurry of activity, obviously. Major progress has happened. But I think in each of these meetings, as it's happened today, there's more questions that come than answers. I don't, we're sort of converging, but I guess my main point is, I think we've attacked this the wrong way. And so here's just a suggestion. And maybe that's sort of a little bit what Bill Russell was just saying. I really think you have to make this really simple. And the goal is, will HCD approve this? And so I think if we're going to take 10 days to get this done to the Planning Commission, I do think we want to go simple and then see if we can get something approved, and then work on the complexity of underground parking and 3 stories and all the things that we're spending time talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Oh, I see. Okay, we're going to go back to in the room. Please come up and say your name.
I'm Ellen Bernazza, 120 Nath Horse, and I just have 2 things to say. First, I would request that the provisions in the housing element for 4370 are transferred over to the proposed zoning amendment, because it's all, you've taken some of it and put it in there, but you didn't put like single-story houses that are on Nath Horse. Those are, and I think it would clear things up in the future for anybody that wanted to build something on the property, that they could, they're not, oh, shall we take it from here or here? But if it was actually in the amendments, it would be great. Second off, what Jim said, these two represent our neighborhood. We have had neighborhood meetings for well over a year, many meetings, and they are our spokesman. So do know that they do represent a large number of homes in the Mathwurst area, Mathwurst-Applewood area. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, I see a hand up online. Rita Gomez, if you could go, please.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. I'm happy to hear from the people tonight that are actually owning and building some of these projects. Some owners of properties in the past were not contacted until they saw their addresses on different lists from the town, and then they contacted the town themselves. This is a much healthier discussion than most of the X number of hours our residents have put in without movement, that we as residents, and clearly HCD agrees with the residents that things are not always working out as clear as they could possibly work out and make it just a little simpler. But it seems that we've done a lot of progress, a little late, but still a lot of progress recently. I hope that the new planning person is brought up to par so that the work isn't stalled when that person comes on to the job. Who's going to, sign off when these things move forward? Is it just the town council? And that I hope when all of this is pulled together, that we keep in mind, I don't know what the list of the priorities from the town, the town council had a meeting last month about their priorities for the town. And I don't know, I haven't seen that list yet, but I really hope that finances, safety, and infrastructure are top of that list. And as we think about these different projects, I hope that we're keeping those three things in mind. So thank you for letting me make my comments. And, there's going to be new people, but the rest of us, we're living here. So please keep us in mind too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I see another hand went up online. Christy, if you could give us your 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, thanks. You guys are all working real hard and discussing important things for our future, and I appreciate that. Let's see, I am noticing that in San Mateo County that there's an ADU resource center coming about, and I'm reading their housing element now, and that can be read for public comment due by 4/23/24. It is important for the Planning Commission and ASCC to read this because this is what's coming forward in our county. So we need to be aware of what's coming forward in our county, and they have dates that things are due as well, or that they are putting dates on. So they want the updated ordinance by April or May in 24. This is ADU Resource Center. And then they want to take it to a supervisor meeting June, July 24. And then they want it to take effect by September 24. So that's just an interesting fact. I think the more definitions you can include for all of your words and terminology help the public understand. Please define all words and put them in writing. I think what's going on with the church is probably related to Senate Bill 330, where the expiration of that law is 2030. Prevents local government from downsizing unless they upzone an equivalent amount elsewhere within their boundaries. So I think we all need to be aware of this law. And once a property is upzoned, it usually is not downzoned. Let's see. I said that one. Okay. What other cities have you looked at their objective standards that are similar to our cities? So this is a question for ASCC and planning commission, and have you reviewed them and can we learn from them? I know that objective standards are usually done over a year's period of time. So when I tell people we're trying to do it in 3 weeks, they're absolutely amazed that we're trying this. But it's important, and we do want to get our housing element passed. So I just think going to other cities that are similar. We have Hillsborough with Hills,
You need to wrap up, Christie.
Woodside. Are we checking with our neighbors? So let's put the word affordable back into the affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Christie. Let's see, I am not seeing any further public comments. Was there anything particular that anybody in the DC, well, I think most of them truly were comments versus questions today, but was there anything in there that you felt the need to know about?
I have one.
Sure.
I guess it's actually a question about the comment from Tim Clark. He referenced being able to develop either 2 units or at the density 20 to 23. I'm just wondering where the 2 units comes from, if staff knows.
No, I don't have information on that specifically.
I see. So I guess just to repeat for the people on the phone, he says it's coming from the multifamily 2 to 4. Which, so maybe a question to staff, that zoning does not apply to Ladera Church, is that right?
Right. So they're currently multifamily 20 to 23.
Wait a minute, they have to be something else now, since we don't have.
Currently.
We don't have a 2023 now.
Current zoning. Oh, sheesh. Let me look back. Single family?
Kim, you're coming up. Do you know the answer to that?
I'm sorry, Ronnie, thank you. I should have come up earlier to answer the question. The only zoning available to us would be either the RN4, which would allow us to put 2 units on a half an acre, or the one that you've given us right now, which is the RN10. There's no place in the middle for where we want to be.
Gotcha.
That's the point. Is that clarified? I
Yeah,
recognize.
I mean, I guess in your comment, you said that you could develop 2 units. I guess you were saying you could do that if you were zoned as RM 2 to 4, which.
Correct.
You're not.
Understood. Thank you. I'm sorry, it wasn't clear.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, we need to move to discussion. And so I may frame up again. Again, you're obviously welcome to bring up anything you want, but sort of the 3 things I wanted to query everybody on was, where do you think we are in terms of readiness to hand off to the council and HCD? What are your concerns and priorities? And what suggestions do you have on how to move forward? Is anybody ready to move to try with those, or you want to think for a minute? I'm not seeing anybody rushing. They're all deep in thought for everybody online. Ann, are you ready?
Yeah, I can state some
Okay.
issues.
You can come back later. too.
Okay,
You
good.
can come-
I'm
I'm not
ready
gonna let
to
you,
go.
sorry, if you want to have, like, add, we can do that too.
Um,
It's a discussion.
Okay, good. I'm definitely not ready to pass something on to the town council. You know, when we've done resolutions before, they were in a very tidy form. We could read every word. In fact, the planning commission, since we're making laws, we even spend time on changing commas to semicolons and, you know, really getting all the words right. And right now, we don't have a clean document to look at, so no, we definitely need a clean document before we can I think I'm used to, we can make a few changes, but they've got to be ones you can almost do verbally, right? Like we're changing this line to these words, that line to these words. Right now, I don't know how other people feel, but I'm kind of like this, like, oh yeah, and then over there, and then I'll pick up this piece. You know, can I state the obvious, the concerns and priorities? We are under the gun to make some rules for zoning that support the numbers in our housing element. The world has changed since I was on the Housing Element Committee, but we did the work before January 2023 on these sites, right? And these numbers, I think, all made sense. Property owners' ideas change and other reasons the numbers and goals have changed. So if we zone for what we've got in there, it's, you know, it's not what people really want to do. Exactly. So I feel in a quandary. I feel under pressure to just go ahead and get zoning in place, even though it doesn't satisfy what, you know, it'd be more practical and make sense with what property owners might really do, which in the end, I want to be sensible. I guess one thought is that we make a subcommittee of the Planning Commission to take all the good info and work from the ASCC and then make a, really pare it down to the absolute minimum to have some suitable zoning rules. I think we still need the piece where we work with the consultants to make sure the dimensions and the rules do add up to the numbers currently in our housing element. And then we leave it for a separate problem to deal with the letter that Tim Clark sent to the town council. And I mean, I think that the town council has been planning to revise or relook at the housing element anyhow. So that'll be one more piece that needs to get looked at, but I guess that's what I'm thinking right now.
Okay. Linda.
I'm gonna pass a zoning code onto the town council until I can see a detailed red line. Starting with the comments from the ASCC and the comments that you guys made, as we discussed earlier. I'd like to see the draft that we were given with the added comments. I think Ann raises an interesting question about to what extent we need to go through the ASCC documents. I guess my second point is I've written a lot of rules, I've written a lot of laws, and then there's this housing agency over here. I would say philosophically, I think it's really important to take the details that we have from ASCC and make the most coherent set of rules supporting the values that we think are important here. Of course, we have to pay attention to the housing element, but I don't think we should be a slave to sort of what we think HCD is sitting over there wanting from us. I operate on the assumption they're never going to approve anything, and they're operating in a way that I personally find offensive. I don't think they're really within the State Administrative Procedures Act, but I don't want to get too far afield. But I just don't want us to self-censor thinking what we might want to put together. I think we need to put together what we think is the most comprehensive package with many of the things that the ASCC put together. I hadn't thought of Ann's idea, maybe a little subcommittee, but I think as long as it's all brought into one huge document and we can review that document with a lot of different red lines, I think that's important. I am sympathetic, moving on to another comment, to the comment, it may have been Jim White, about how I'll say this town has maybe created, you know, the situation that we're in now. I think the process that we as a planning commission put together and involved the ASCC has been a good one. Whoever got us to where we are right now, that's all history. And I think sticking with it the way we have is a good one. And so, John, your question, where do we go next? I'm just dying to see the detailed red line thing that I can go through item by item. There may be more issues. It may take more than a meeting. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know if the use of a subcommittee is necessarily solve any of that, but somehow or other, it's all got to be brought together in one place. My final comment, and I'm newer here than a lot of the other members, I guess Bonnie and I are the two newest. I don't feel like I want to draft for agreements that may or may not have been made or situations that may or may not be particular. I want to draft for the whole town for what we think are the important values, the important issues, the important elements. I am not sympathetic, I'm sorry, I'll just say it, to trying to simplify all of this. It's hard to simplify. I mean, my third grade school teacher used to say, you know, if you can write it in 5 pages, try to teach yourself to write it in 1. And I mean, that was hard. And it's just, I think that's beyond what we have time for right now. Having said that, I do want to get to specific situations, but I think we really need to get the zoning code there and in place and then deal with those. There's a simple drafting way to do that, and I'm not unmindful of the incredible town that we live in and the incredible comments. And I learn so much every time I listen to people here, but there's simple ways to do that in the drafting. You know, I mean, I remember one code we wrote, and at the end we put, you know, here's what we really are trying to say. This stuff is really complicated and we can't make it any more simple. But if you have a specific situation, come and talk to us about it. I'm sort of speaking tongue in cheek here, but there are ways in the drafting to deal with problems if we overlook them. And nobody's perfect, and I don't think we're going to be perfect. So I think that where we are now, John, is of course, there's one more factor before I sum up. I really think it's important before we send this to the council to talk about the fact that we know there are other issues in the zoning code and this, as I asked you about early in the question section. I really think we need to, if we don't lay out those, or maybe we can lay out some of those issues as a for example or including. I am interested in a process that might simplify. I don't have time for it now. I just don't think I have time for it. But that might be something if we had more time I could do. I mean, I'm really interested in the fact that we've got schools that are on our map right now or in residential areas. I mean, we need to fix our map. So I think there are things in the I mean, that's actually the zoning for the school is residential. So at Corte Madera School. So I think there are things we need to fix, and I would really like a commitment that that's going to happen. I'd like to see it in, you know, 4 to 6 months. So John, to wrap up, I think that's where I think I am. That's where I think we are. And I'm not going to get into particular concerns about common area or floor space or anything like that. I think, again, until we actually see the text, to me, I don't want to talk about that. So for me, the next step is getting that red line that pulls together everything we have from the ASCC. And I'm not opposed to and suggesting maybe a little subcommittee if Adrienne needs help. She needs a lot more help than we can give her. I mean, we need some staff here, but I'm happy to, you know, I think if that would be helpful, I'd be happy to do something like that.
You ready, Ronnie?
Sure. Yeah, we're not there yet. That being said, I liked Adrian's suggestion of aiming for our next meeting, May 1st, to basically have target then for having something written that is ready for us to have a resolution on. And I think to get there, staff should drive that next phase of, you know, consolidating down what we've gotten from the ACC and our feedback today into the an updated version of the zoning code. Yeah, I think I like the idea of keeping things as simple as reasonable as possible. I think a big question is to what extent we pull in this attempt to, define simple, to define more standards for simple single-story buildings or other like modular affordable units. It sounds like staff is receptive to being able to do that in sort of focused way. And so I think we should try to do that, but maybe not go overboard. I guess just in general, I don't think we're going to be able to like anticipate all the possible scenarios. So I think we, give it a best effort, keep it fairly simple. And I think it's okay to rely on all the other fallbacks that we have, which include density bonus law, SB4, the supportive housing overlay, and the discretionary review process. I think we should not have any changes to the housing element itself, including the supportive housing overlay. And then I guess in general for the MF4 for Glen Oaks, I think what ASCC proposed, at least to me, seemed somewhat overly restrictive, basically restricting it to a single story and fairly small-ish units. I could see Stanford potentially wanting to develop somewhat larger units and have 2 stories, and I would be okay with that. So I would increase the floor area ratio to enable 2-story and probably increase the unit sizes somewhat. Yeah, I think that's what I have right now.
Okay, Nicholas.
I'd like to appreciate our senior planning staff, our remaining planning staff for remarkable work for bringing us where we are. I'd like to appreciate the ASCC for helping us along from where we were about a month ago. And of course, the residents who've been weighing in, who have aspirations for what their town should be and specific aspirations for what their properties and the community should be, taking us forward. We're not there, clearly. My general thought is to focus on the big pieces right now. That is to preserve the integrity of the housing element, not to try and carve it up, carve it down. It's not a perfect document, wasn't a perfect process, but it's ours. And it is part of the general plan, and I don't see value at this point in time to try to reopen it or to create particular safety valves on it right now. I'd focus on what it is that's really important for us. And to that end, the land use controls are obviously foremost. The addition of the LAR, the FAR, the height limitations, and then also the design standards and the really nice and thoughtful job of converting what could be seen as a discretionary into an objective standard for the design standards is good and impressive. As somebody referenced that they told a friend that we were doing that in 3 weeks, and their friend's jaw drop. It is impressive. I might take some small exception with respect to issues of size of of units. I think that that's a nice way of controlling the size to addressing density and unit production. I think that the scale that you've presented is pretty generous. You can do a lot within it, but I think that it helps get us from here to there. There are a bunch of things from my perspective, and it's interesting that Anne and Linda have called out that I'm right there with. And I think, and if I mischaracterize, I'm sure you'll let me know. But there are issues of simplification, of streamlining that are good and important, but don't necessarily need to be handled right now. And from my perspective, we are implementing the housing element with the zoning, and it needs to get itself approved by HCD as well as council and be fundamentally acceptable. There are other things that we can add to improve on it to create greater flexibility and streamlining and perhaps clarity. But those are things that will relax the zoning code and can be added on and can be handled in a more judicious way with the addition of time. There are other things, for example, like actually putting together a municipal matrix of concessions, which is something that we can do that can create some additional flexibility and can, in principle, avoid some excesses should those occur. So I think that we've come a long way. We've done some remarkable work, and using the terms we here really generously. I think others have done that, not necessarily myself. And I would focus on those things that we actually need and then revisit those things that can make it better. I would also agree with Linda that creating a listing of additional items that we might think about doing within a finite period of time is a good thing to pass on to council, and we can talk and think about what the form of that document might be, and maybe come up with some suggestion for our next meeting, because there are a lot of very good ideas that need to get fleshed out, and I think probably some additional time would only improve that. So that's where I think we are. Or that's at least where I'd like to be. And I'd like to be back here in a couple, 3 weeks with a document that's in a red line format. This have some modeling done on it so we know how realistic it is. And this may not be the line by line kind of review that we sometimes do, but we'll be able to do some fly specking on it. And that's where I am.
Okay. I'm going to go through my thoughts on this. I thought it was pretty interesting, actually. The good news is that we actually have, I think, we have a huge amount of agreement about where we are kind of across the board between the planning commission, between our residents, between the property owners. I think that's good. I'm also of the opinion that code is not ready for us to hand off. And my little notes to myself said, oh, we need at least an annotated draft, even if we were having the consultants, sort of test it after the fact. You gotta have something concrete to test. I do believe that, we should not be changing the housing element. As we know, any kind of changes to that, invite a redo, which we certainly don't want. I do recognize that there's some thought that, no matter what we turn in, HCD might actually reject it. And to be honest, I'd rather have that sooner rather than later, to sort of then, okay, then we're told we have to open up the HE, but I don't think we open up the whole housing element on our own. I also commend the ASCC in terms of how quickly you guys have worked on this. But I think it's pretty clear, as you pointed out, that if we want to do the job we normally do in Portola Valley, you're going to need more time on that. I would also echo, I think, Ann's comments about surprise, surprise, things change. I suspect they're going to change in the future too. And we're going to get this one in and, then we'll find out, well, we are or we're not making our numbers, and we're going to have to come back and look at it again. So I think there's value in moving forward versus trying to sort it all out to begin with. We are in an interesting situation in that, despite the fact that we're trying to sort of make sure this works for particular property owners, their plans are still in flux. I mean, we don't actually have submitted projects or applications that we can test against. They know more than they did when they first came up and 2 years ago when they brought about what they were going to do. So I think we have to build some leeway in there for that, and pretty clear moving forward kind of testing with those folks and including them in the process is going to be key for us. I think the really good news, I think somebody else brought up, was we actually have some potentially real projects here that would move us forward versus sort of hoping that somebody's going to come along. So I think I think that was Dave Cardinal brought that up right away. I do have a proposal for moving forward. It's a two-part proposal. One part is giving the ASCC the time that they need to go through this. I think Linda was suggesting kind of the 3 to 6 months to go in and really work on some of these numbers, really test it out, do all your normal work about trying to figure out how does this really work. I would like, separately from that, to do a much abbreviated version of this. I'd be suggesting that we take 1 or 2 planning commission members, sit down with staff, go through everything from the ASCC and come up with a much abbreviated version of the code that we think HCD would actually approve, and would be satisfying to our property owners in there. I'd love to have an ASCC person potentially join us on that too. I do think, the goals for that would be simplification, reducing complexity. I'm okay if our next round has more complexity, if we've adequately thought it out and we understand what that means and whether or not it will actually work. I think we have to make sure we believe we have a path for approval before we hand it off to the town council, which means doing some of the sizing, the testing, and certainly having the red line code that you actually can really look at. Working with HCD and the owners on this. I do think I am talking about being a little draconian, and I hope nobody thinks, I hope the ASCC doesn't think of me as you might think of me as draconian, in that way, because I would do things like, I don't think we need to deal with building separation while we still have fire code incoming, and we don't know what the state's going to do about ADUs and setbacks and building separation and, the sheds count. I probably would be, when I look at Ladera Church, I'm proposed, I would actually be willing to forego the design standards for some of these projects. I think that's something you would never do in a large municipality when you don't know who's going to be doing the projects. In this case, we know who these people are and we kind of know what they're thinking. I do not believe, you know, if we leave out objective design standards in this route, that the church or Jim or in the teasing case that they're going to do something bizarre and odd. In fact, I'd even propose on the modular standard size that you actually do it the reverse way around, which is work with Ladera Church and say, okay, what are these units that you're thinking you're going to do with the with Housing for Humanity, and make sure that maybe that's where the design guidelines come from for the small, simple approaches. I think there's a lot of benefit in looking at a lot of the other pieces in there. I would love to see the ASCC continue to look at, we talk about the cleaning up existing code. I think in general, just the turning into the more we can go objective. So we talked about referring to things like the lighting and current existing code. That would be part of what we'd be proposing to be initially. But I think going back in and then saying, well, let's separate out what the truly objective parts of that are, that apply everywhere in Porter Valley, make a lot of sense. I love the low cost code idea in terms of how else can we think about that. And I think we have more to do in terms of wrestling with simplification. So that would be my proposal, that we move forward in a two-step process. A couple of members of the PC working with staff. I think, to be honest, with all the other stuff we've shown and the complexity and where we are with the ASCC, I don't believe we can do all of that in 2 weeks, or was it 3 weeks, Joel, 3 weeks. I do think if we really strip it down, we can get something, or at least that would be the objective, something that it would work, you know, for our residents and for HCD. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, can I ask, the abbreviated version that you're imagining for the next couple of weeks, could you say a little bit more about what that would be, maybe referencing the original?
Oh, it's totally based on the original. Yes. Well,
By original, you mean March 20th presentation at the Planning Commission?
well, two pieces. The original being first the housing element, what we put in there.
Yeah.
I think it has to match that exactly. From a structural perspective, I believe the bulk of the code that we were given, most of it still applies. So the March 20th code, yes. And that we're going through and taking all of the ASCC's comments. The ASCC, some of them are very specific, right? Scratch this line, whatever. That's the perfect kind of thing you need to do. I think they have other suggestions in there that we'd have to figure out, do they apply or not?
Okay, so you're not suggesting to, I guess, go down to something more reduced than the March 20th original thing from the consultant. So it could be.
I think it
something-
might be more reduced than that. Yes, because I think there's design guidelines in there that we might choose to leave out because we don't think we know enough yet to actually move forward on them, that they need more study.
Well, how does that,
What?
Things like the overhangs and the stoops and things like that.
So you are suggesting that.
Yeah,
A lot of that.
I am.
Okay.
That's what I meant by draconian.
Yeah, I don't think that I can't imagine myself supporting that if that came to this body. Once we back away from our design guidelines, trying to reincorporate them in the atmosphere that we're in is going to be extremely challenging. Is going to be.
Why would that, I guess I'm curious, why do you think that?
Because it's placing additional restrictions on what you can do with property and the flexibility. And that is exactly not where HCD is at this point in time. It's easier to chip away at the granite than it is to glue it back on in this
So you
environment.
think our revised zoning code would trigger HCD review?
I think that could be subject to challenge. I have no interest in going down that direction at this point in time. I think we've made some progress. I think that we can improve upon it and we can modify it, but, and we can create streamlining and exceptions to help people get from here to there. But creating a framework zoning that creates very little by way of land use controls and very little by way of design guidelines will be very difficult for us to claw our way back to something that we might actually want.
So I guess I personally don't believe that we can't claw our way back from that, but, yeah,
I'm not willing to go on that trip.
Okay.
I guess it is.
It's in your boat.
Is my thought.
Okay.
I am, where I thought you were going is reducing the flexibility or the opting out, or creating the exceptions at this point in time. I think is challenging to make sure that we get it right. And I'm totally for looking at how we can introduce that once we have the basic structure. Getting the balance right now, I think is, given the time that we have, it's just gonna be really hard. So I'm for being draconian, but maybe not in the direction that you're going.
I don't know that I did, having you reworded that way, I don't know that I necessarily disagree either on that. I mean, it kind of depends on what do we end up with after we do this draconian cut and where does it fit in the whole thing. I guess I'm not particularly, I mean, in truth, I am talking a lot about the trust with some of our folks here that I don't think our particular landowners are going to be the problem. You're suggesting it might create another problem. Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's right. And I don't think that we're going to be able to solve Tim's problem because Tim's problem is a housing element problem. And he's got some, it's inappropriate for me to talk about some direction that he might go and how to handle it. But there are lots of people with skills who can help him get from here to there. But I don't think that the modifications that you're talking about are going to help that particular piece of property do what that property owner wants to do. And I'm sympathetic, and I'll look forward to seeing an outstanding project, or maybe I'll look forward to not seeing an outstanding project coming across in front of us because it will be done ministerially. But I don't think that, I think that the problem that property has is a much more fundamental kind of problem that we're going to be able to resolve with the zoning right now. And
We have to give them, we have to give them some reasonable assurance that what we end up with will support them.
We can't give them anything. We can give them what's in the housing element. And we can say, it's a big world and you've got a lot of law. And you've got a council that can revise the housing element, but that's not where we are. You know, it's very rare that you can hear me say that. That's not my job. And, you know, I might wish that it were. But, you know, we aren't in a, I don't see that we're in a position to offer satisfaction to Ladera Church through this body right now.
So how would you get to something in 2 weeks?
Ron is gonna answer that,
And some
but-
variation on it, because I do think we're gonna have to give ASCC more time to work on all the issues and great stuff that's come up.
You
So-
don't
so
think
the-
we
the
can
short-
take the versions that they have so far provided to us and move those into code sections? Are you unwilling to do that?
No,
or
I'm not
you
unwilling
think-
at all. If we
Okay.
could do that, that would be great. I'm just being cognizant of the fact that it's not a lot of time and we're not very quick.
I mean, so like if you take
I
the.
think it's quite doable, and I think to
Alright.
not do that is to sort of push aside all the effort everybody's put into
Well, that's what I
this in
wanted
the
to be sure
last
that
few
nobody
years,
felt
in
like
the
I was
last
doing that.
weeks. And I think it's really important to make a, all out, run for the goal line effort to try to get all that in there. And I mean, I think, so you were going along and I was fine with you, and then
Yeah.
you started doing draconian and I saw that stuff all fall off the table. I totally would like to see us try very, very hard to get all that put in there, and
Maybe I shouldn't
that
have
was the
used the word
comment I
draconian.
made about, that was the comment I made about, let's try to get it together. Let's worry less about simplifying. You can always simplify it later, which was sort of, I think, part of what Nicholas said. I would just say philosophically, I don't know how you solve specific problems at specific properties in a code. I mean, our role here is to get this code and to get this code
Right.
done. And unless we put a specific section in about it, but I think, I don't know enough about this, but it sounds like something the town council may be able to solve or
Mhm.
something independent of what we do.
Mhm.
And so I think we have to not be driven by specific circumstances, I'm afraid. And
And we don't have-
hopefully we can put language in that will allow us to deal with that. And I completely agree with you that, we a lot of trust. It's a church after all, and, and neighbors that we trust, but we can't write this to our family, write this to the code.
I totally agree with that. And in fact, we don't have the application to actually write it for them anyway,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And things may well change in the future.
I guess
So if I hadn't used the word draconian, I'd have you guys on board or? I
I
haven't
don't
quite
mind
figured that
the-
out.
The word is, well, to me, like we had March 20th from the consultants.
Yeah.
is Well-defined, ready to go. And I guess where you lost me was when you're saying you're going to start cutting stuff from there. I don't see the reason to do that. I think we have that baseline. I think we have a lot of good input from the ASCC, much of which is also like
So,
fairly well-defined and ready to go. The stuff in the tables with numbers, get that stuff in there. There's some stuff that is at this point more open-ended and will maybe take the 3 to 6 months. So that's where I think we should defer that
Mhm.
and not try to scramble that to get that in, or try to, try to do what we can do in 2 weeks, basically. Driven by staff and consultants writing code. That's.
And the property owners have to feel like it works for them. The problem we have with the March 20th, of course, is that they kind of said that didn't necessarily work. Now, we all had the issue of not everything reflected what was truly in the housing element. So we'll put all that back and see how it goes. I'm okay with that, as long as we're driving towards something in 2 weeks. And I still might suggest some cuts if we can't make it, but I have no problem with trying to include as much as we can.
Then I think if we have that draft and there are still comments, whether they're property owners or the AFCC, we can amend it right here while we talk. I mean, we can fix it in real time. I don't like those 6 words. I don't like those 6 words. So,
So who's gonna work with staff? I'm happy to do so, obviously, because I suggested it, but,
I think you at least, could be just one person, or I would love to do it, but the timing is not gonna work for me.
Nicholas, you had the first one to do the opposing view, that would seem to be, if you're around, it would seem like that would be a good, a good trade-off.
Yeah, no.
Compliment,
I'm gonna
compliment.
be the ignorant child of this coming week, so I'm gonna be out of town.
Oh, you're not here, okay. Well, now we're down to 2.
just last night got back. I'll help you. I mean, I'd like to help you. Pretty hard. It's been
May
busy
not
2
help.
weeks.
Unless you want to, Ronnie, did you want to volunteer or?
Either way, I probably couldn't. So everyone did.
Linda, since you were the second one to sort of say, I agree with Nicholas, if you would do that, I think that would be a good choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My only constraint here is to get it on the calendar, what we're gonna do and when.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay.
I think that we also need some assistance respectfully from the ASCC, or
Yep.
at least one or potentially two members.
I think I asked for that, didn't I?
Yeah,
I did
you
remember,
did.
I did remember to ask for
I
that.
think you did. and
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're looping them in.
Okay,
If I could through the chair.
absolutely.
You know, in the spirit of keeping things simple, I think there's some, you know, some important things, you know, that would be pretty easy to, you know, to spin off of what Ronnie was saying, is that there are a few things that are, you know, really pretty easy to, you know, to chop off.
Okay,
Like the floor area, landscape area, you know, the adjustments, you know, to the coverage area and the maximum building areas. You know, I think if you got to that point, you know, you'd have a real winner at this point, even if you didn't change any of the other, you know,
okay.
objective standards.
And you think we're good to do that?
Well, I think, I mean, I've done the mathematical models. You know, you know, I do think that, you know, with some more time, you know, some architectural models, you know, of what these potential, you know, what these potential buildings might, you know, might be, you know, should be done. At the same time, you know, we're talking about few properties and the properties that are going to be really developed, you know, in affordable housing are going to have the availability of the density bonus anyway. And at that point, we wouldn't be changing things, you know, in such a way that HCD, you know, wouldn't see that this is a big, you know, is a much more objective, you know, point of view. So the ASCC comments were really trying to, you know, attend to the broader issues. And I think some of the minutia, you know, around some of our comments, I do think, you know, want to find a way into some level of, you know, either design standards or, you know, something else. But the majority, you know, of the issues are really dealt with those four classifications. You know, adding the floor area ratio, adding the landscape area ratio, adjusting, you know, the coverage area, and dealing with the maximum building areas, you know, rather than just dealing with, you know, the first floor area. And I think at that point, you know, it would be in good shape, you know, to move forward as, at least as a, you know, as the draft, the draft that is going to be approved, you know, that goes to HCD.
Okay, excellent.
I hope you won't lose the lighting,
Sounds
fencing.
so easy.
But the lighting and fencing stuff, you know, if we don't touch it, stays in as it's
Right.
currently constituted.
I think those are design guidelines that live out.
No, there are a whole bunch of ordinances about that.
So they cross-reference
Yeah,
the design guidelines?
yeah, the fencing ordinance
We'll
would
check that.
still be in place.
Yeah.
The lighting ordinance would still be in place.
I think
You know,
Carter's right.
you know, light, you know, the reflectivity numbers would still be in place. The site development permit would still be in place. So, you get,
Design guidelines?
well, the design guidelines still are in place, but they don't make a lot of sense. You know, because, you know, they're, the way that they're constituted right now, it really is policy, you know, rather than,
I don't disagree with you.
But-
So I
but-
think that
but
you've done
what-
a nice
what-
job and you're ashamed to.
but what we did in looking at the numbers, you know, was try to adjust the numbers, you know, so that they would result in the kinds of things that we're talking about. It could be, smaller, lower scale buildings that have more space in them. And, probably the biggest one is the maximum building area. It probably, if it was going to be argued in front of, HCD, that's the one that probably, increases the cost of building most. But the reality is that affordable buildings are going to,
We're gonna blow that out. of the way.
everything gets thrown up in the air and, between concessions and incentives and everything else. But, for the meantime, I think that if you got there, there'd be a way to do it.
Okay, who's going to work with us?
I mean, I could only work on parts of it.
Oh, that's true.
Is the
Well
problem for
then.
me.
Who's the obvious next choice? Well, then. Well, we don't, we got to schedule it.
I don't know.
Okay. All right, we're good.
Many meetings, would say.
I do think that the concept of the simple design standard that we put in there, dependent on what planning department says about that, I do think you should consider somehow getting that simple section that we have.
I have no problem doing it if we can fit it in. If we can, believe me, I think, and I believe actually, some of the discussion was, don't lose all these other suggestions people had. I think this little group, as we're working on that, can go through and say, they can do the initial list of, oh yeah, we said we would like to do this and that. It's not like the planning commission can assign those to the ASCC, but we could certainly recommend to the town council that we think the ASCC should work on this because we all agree it'd be really good. So we can do that too. Yes.
Oh, and can I just clarify or ask for my own, so we're not all surprised at the proposal? In reference, let's just use the Ladera Church site, MF 23. We're going to have zoning code that part of it looks like what we saw on March 20th, which is form-based standards that say if the building's more than 30 feet wide or 30-foot wall, you have to have this kind of window, that kind of window, the little arch, this and that, the details. That would accommodate a true 23 dwelling units per acre because that almost has to be 2 or some stories, right? But then it's going to have a branch. It's going to say, or you can do this more modular, simple thing. And what we have from the ASCC. It's going to be like a 2-part thing.
It's got to be code level. So something about what you're, got to be something, I don't know the best way to write it, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
got to be. You
We're
can't
going to
be
see
conceptual.
writing that covers both those topics though, is what we're going to see.
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
I wasn't aware that we were going to have good optionality based on what we were talking about.
I think for this one, we have to come up with a path that is consistent with 23 dwelling units per acre,
Totally agree.
which you can't do with modular, super simple, right? It's got to be 2 or 3 story. So we either stay silent on it and say, yeah, just build a big old box and we're going to let you. I don't think we want that. To your point, we don't want to claw it all back. So let's live with those form-based standards that we have a draft of. But then we wish we had a simple path for modular units. So we are going to take the writing and the good work that the ASCC did and you're right, somehow write code that says either or.
Or, I mean, maybe this is, I mean, not that we can't discuss it now, but if you had thoughts, other ways on how to do it, I have no thoughts on exactly how to do that. I believe we need to do that. So, if you have ideas on how to do that, can we hear them? And like, we can either hear them now or you can send them in to us.
Or if you think there's something simpler than this is all I have been able to think of is that we've got to have.
But the simplest is don't do it in the density bonus.
But we need to have consistency with we need to have vertical consistency between the zoning and the housing element. We can't go in with the density bonus and as before, we got you from here to there. You need to do what you do.
Density bonus has to add on. That was the whole point, was it added on. We can't sort
No,
of
no,
make it
that's
into.
not what I meant.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the most. It's,
When we have a draft in front of
Right,
us.
I just wanted to bring this up because it's gonna look untidy, but I think that's what we're faced with is when we put out these principles that we want to keep the HE
Mhm.
housing element and the zoning needs to support it. But we would like to listen to the property owners and do something that's on the path at least towards.
Property owner is not going to be satisfied with, it's one of these things, the property owner wants to do 6 units, and that's not what the housing element divides for. You're not gonna get from here to there through the zoning board. If I'm going to go and do, if I have my heart set on 6 units, I am going to be disappointed. Because at the time at which we developed the housing element, that's what we did. And I might say, if we go back to the record, you will find me saying, I don't see how to do that. But,
Could I-
But I'm not gonna
So-
say,
so-
I told you so.
Could
So, no,
could I-
but I think
See, but-
wasn't your suggestion though that we need to
And
mention that to the town council? That
I
is there
think
some
we
other
can-
way to deal with this?
I think that and the question is, you're gonna need to be able to model out whatever it is that we're proposing to do with the land use controls. And if we can't do it with the land use controls, then you're gonna end up doing some form-based code or some really remarkably some zoning that seems like it doesn't make a lot of sense, given the aesthetics of the town. Because we have said that we're gonna do 20 to 23 units here, and that's what the zoning is going to support.
Could I make just a comment?
Go for it.
My message that I sent this morning was about the idea of using a land use controls to define the developable area on a lot. And for Ladera's situation, because if we use that significant tree ordinance where you're not allowed to cut down a large oak, for example, that's of a certain size, that takes out of the developable area that you can actually build that whole section of the property. So all of a sudden, we're not talking about even a half acre, we're talking about, a quarter acre or, so then it.
You're gonna need to work that out within the context of that property, because that's the sole property that you're dealing with. And figure out what the modeling is gonna deliver, such that you've got the density that's called out in the housing, that's called out in the housing. And, you don't need to have a form-based code and a more traditional land use control format. You can have one or the other. I think it's weird having, no offense, to having an overlay or an option of picking one or the other within the
But-
context of a more traditional land use code.
But I think Ann is talking more about design standards. So we're saying objective design standards that are simpler for a one-story, simple building that then get more complex. And it becomes what was proposed in March, whenever, the original document that has extremely complex things that are meant for 3-story buildings. So you need that progression within the design standards to be able to handle the different.
Certainly have design standards, but it's like if you're gonna, having a form-based code and land use controls as two different, in traditional Euclidean land use controls doesn't make sense from my perspective. Having a traditional land use controls and then having design standards over that is
I understand that language.
So the good news is, we actually all agree on the objectives. We're starting to get into how do we implement this?
If I could, through the,
Absolutely, you could. You might as well jump in.
if I could, through
No,
the-
I mean, I said Ronnie first, then I'll come back to you.
okay.
So, I mean, what I was trying to say, and maybe I could pose it as a question. So one option is, that we're talking about, is to have standards that are supporting the multifamily 20 to 23 units per acre, and then have an option of simpler, single-story, modular type of development. That's one option. The other option is not to do the simple single-story thing, and the owner of the property can rely on density bonus law, not to increase the density, but to bypass the zoning codes and SB4 and whatever other mechanisms.
But I think we have to make sure the property owner is aware of that. And this is a case where I think asking for the town to kind of assist in how we put that all
sounds good.
together
And-
is part of sort of making sure that this works for everybody.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, I am in favor now of trying to do our best effort at finding these kind of simple standards for single story or whatever they end up being. But with you know, keeping in mind that we're probably not going to be able to cover all scenarios, and like there are other mechanisms, including discretionary review as well.
Variances,
Yeah.
certainly it's a unique property.
That's exactly why you write a code, the way you write a code. Solve all these things with the code.
Wait a minute, but I know,
Okay, go ahead.
Carter, you were next.
Yeah, it would seem to me that, I mean, the elephant in the room is, you know, if you got a property that, you know, that the owner, and I think there's many of us, you know, agree, you know, think, you know, the zoning minimum for that site, you know, is really, you know, hard, if not impossible to get to, you know, and create rational kinds of housing. I mean, if the other way is to, you know, to gerrymander, you know, the design into, you know, doing super small, you know, 200, you know, square foot SROs, you know, for 4 or 5 units, you know, out of the 10. I'm just concerned that, you know, if we make it hard, you know, and there isn't a clear path, nothing will be done, you know, and, you know, the town is going to be worse off than, you know, than they are now.
So you agree that we could be draconian? So I'm just kidding you.
No, the draconian part is, you know, I mean, I use the word a lot, but not in this context. So I mean, I think that, yeah, the clarity around, you know, the alternative path, you know, that the church-owned property, you know, could follow, you know, to avoid these rules, is just, you know, is a Band-Aid for now, you know, and I just think that it's weird, you know, to be, you know, zoning a property, you know, at a density that it just frankly doesn't make sense. You know, the minimum 20 units an acre was a pipe dream.
But we have to do the housing element.
I
We're not gonna
know.
go in and change the housing element.
Well,
so
the housing element has been deserted.
we're not gonna open it up. I mean, we're not gonna end up doing that.
Well, I just,
Yeah, can I ask you this question? If you put yourself in the box that we are not going to change the housing element in the next month or two, what's your best idea for writing zoning that will get past, I mean, satisfy HCD?
You don't have to answer that
I
right now.
think
It's a-
that might be a good conversation to have with the smaller
Yeah,
The small-
exactly.
smaller
Exactly. No, I
group I'm
think it's a
looking
really good
for our
point. And-
council.
And I thought it was great to offer. We're not trying to put you on the spot. It's like,
But
think about it, because if you get any good ideas, if you get any good ideas, we want them. So, yeah, you have a lot of, you have a lot of, absolutely.
And there are a bunch of options that, you know, that are possible.
I actually wish we
I
would
wouldn't-
discuss them
wouldn't
because
see
I
this
hate
as the
the
right
idea
forum to
of
talk.
staff and this subcommittee working, and then get back to us and we say, no, not that. Do we have I know our choices are terrible, but can we just decide now? We're following the housing element. We're gonna make something that's satisfactory for 23 units per acre, even though none of us think it's realistic. Shall we just put in that, not even put the simpler in it, and realize that the real path is to change the housing element, then make rules that fit the new thing?
So, not that I think staff can have some private offline discussions, with Nicholas, and maybe bring some of those to our little subcommittee. Then we can consult with other consultants or lawyers on there that might actually, give us some of those options. Because I don't think we're gonna get them, I don't think we're gonna do much for them now, is what I'm saying. Yes, we have to do that.
But I think if you are committed to keeping the housing element, then the rules have to leave it at 2023. I mean, that's just, I don't know all the details, but I kind of wish this letter that I haven't seen hadn't come along right now. I mean, come along 2 weeks when we finish this, it would have been a hell of a lot better, even if we had the knowledge. Anyway, but be that as it may, I didn't write the letter. I haven't seen the letter, but I think we have to deal with that. And then there's a subsequent problem, which is the housing element. And to me, it's quite clear. The rule, if the guidelines are, make sure that our zoning code complies with the housing element, that's what we do. And then, as I tried to say indelicately earlier, probably, I can't solve a specific problem in a specific site when I'm doing it. Then you have to come back later. It might be that we could put in language that would give anybody anywhere, including that owner, some options. But we don't have that necessarily right now in our quiver of arrows to put in there.
It feels like we're back to, kind of agreeing, we're just trying to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And none of us had a magic bullet, so we will leave it to the
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
think
yeah,
we
yeah.
can.
staff
The
and
premise is zoning code complies with the
Okay.
housing element. We can't solve that problem, right, period, end of story. And, in the code, there might be other ways to solve the problem. There might be other creative ways to solve
Yep.
the problem, but in the
Yep.
zoning. code,
Yes. Again, I think we're.
Pretty clear to me.
Yeah, so moving forward, we've got our subcommittee, that's gonna red line it, or green and blue line it, or how many of the colors we need.
Think
And try to implement as much as possible as to, what we thought was in there, with some big ones that, the ASCC believes make sense or need to add into our code overall. That same group will at least start the list of what are all the other things we wish, we'd love to see, the ASCC work on. Okay, we'll get there. So those are the two things I thought that we were generally agreeing on how to move forward. Did anybody have any additional thoughts on that before I ask for a motion for the subcommittee?
We kind of have agreement that we'd like to also, in some format, I don't think we discussed the format, whether it's a memo or a letter or part of a resolution, but get a commitment to the other things in the zoning code that are going to need to be dealt with. And it sounds like right now, the first thing is the church. But I think somebody besides me has been singing that song.
Is that different than when I talked about the list of things that we wanted to move forward?
List of things that.
The other, I thought they were all part of the zoning, future
things
zoning
that-
code.
That's future zoning code.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought that's what I was talking about
Okay,
when I
then
said
I'm on board with
we
you, then
start
I
the
understand.
list with the group, just because we're gonna be talking about it and going through our
This is
notes.
in, this is out, this
Yeah.
is next month, this is 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I just
Um,
didn't, the words weren't registering.
I suppose at some point, we might do a colleague memo on that list so that we can have a public discussion on it, something like that.
Just dropping into the whereases and reference. And then that's this, and
Okay.
So whereas, and
All right.
then you just reference.
Gotcha.
the list.
Um, I need a motion for the subcommittee.
I'll make a motion that we create a subcommittee with two of us, John and Linda and Rebecca from the ASCC, to work on a new draft of the zoning code. May I add that is consistent with the current housing element as a constraint that we're gonna put on it. And to be done in time to get into a packet for a planning commission meeting on May 1st. Oh, should I also add working with staff and the consultants to test against the housing element numbers?
I'm about to make a friendly amendment, but somebody needs to second it first before I do that.
I'll second.
There we go. And I would like to make a friendly amendment that we include Chair War on that committee for such aspects as he is does not need to recuse himself.
I accept that amendment.
Motion, with the roll call on that one, I guess.
Oh, yeah, after you make a,
That'd be right.
I think
Yeah.
we do have.
But before we do the roll. Yes, no? Does anybody
Ca-
know?
I,
Come on up.
I'll
We- I don't know,
now
whether-
that,
I don't know
now
what the
that
right
people
order
know
is, but
what
it's
the
okay.
motion is, they can make comments and
yeah,
then
yeah,
we would
yeah.
vote.
Yeah, I must say, this is an extremely discouraging discussion we're having. And the church is in the housing element right now. If you listen to the letter I read, we don't have to stay in the housing element. Reminder.
Okay, I guess I have
Okay.
to say thank you.
Oh, can we have more discussion now?
I think. we have more discussion now.
I mean, are there other people?
Oh, other people who might want to have public comment on it, you mean? And there's no hands online. No. I don't see anybody else here. Oh, no, we don't have any more comment. I think we could come back to discussion. You have another thought?
Oh, I just wanted to say I know it doesn't satisfy, Tim Clark, but I just want to say we feel like we're in a box, that our best solution to getting to a good place for you, and we hear what you're saying, it's not that we're not listening, but that we find ourselves in a box. And we think that our best option, it's not a good option, but our best option is to get our current housing element back into compliance and then make it a second topic to change the sites in the housing element and make them more realistic for you, for the church, and for other sites. But that I, for one, I was on the housing element committee. I think trying to find new sites right now is just super difficult politically in every which way. We will just stay out of compliance. We have a chance to get ourselves into compliance, which is good, and then fix it. I know it's not ideal, but we're making the decision that it's our best of a bunch of lousy choices.
Well, and we only have certain powers. If we are required to stay in compliance with the housing element. That dictates, that limits it. And I agree with you. Not a great outcome, but
Okay, now we can vote on the motion.
Vice Chair Targ,
Aye.
Commissioner Krasinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Brothers,
yes.
Commissioner Kopsil,
Yes.
Chair Golden.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
The chair, as a reminder, you also need a motion to continue the public hearing to the, sorry, is it the May 1st?
That's right, we were in public hearing.
Okay, what?
So moved.
What, oh, can we just say so move?
Yes, you may.
Yes.
Oh. We need a second, I
I'll
suppose.
second that.
All right. We probably don't need a roll call on this one. You want to do a roll call? do you?
I don't want, it's
Go
not that
on.
I want to.
Go
Oh,
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, Vice Chair Targ.
Aye.
Commissioner Krasinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Brothers,
Yes.
Commissioner Kopsil,
Yes.
Chair Golden.
Aye.
There we go.
All right, I'm going to close that section. Now, we have commission reports, staff reports, commission reports. Do a committee, are you guys do anything?
No, but just wait 2 weeks.
Okay, okay. Any additional
Thanks,
staff
Carter.
reports?
Just very briefly that we do have a new director joining us in the planning department, planning and building department, which is wonderful news. His name is Romeo Herrera. He's starting on Monday. I understand that there will be an official communication coming out as well and opportunities to meet him. So we're excited.
Yay.
Thank you.
And with that, I believe we can close the meeting.
So
Oh,
moved.
oh, wait a minute, yeah, we needed, that's right. We lost, yeah.
I move we adjourn.
Mhm. Second. All in favor? This one we can just do aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.